The Skeleton Crew, or Wildfire Ned. Part 2. Author Anonymous. Chapter 11. The Abduction, the Skeleton Dance, the Pursuit, Horrible Doings in the Village. The sounds which Colonel Blood had heard for a moment aroused his bold spirit, and as he crossed the mill bridge, slowly and calmly, he resolved upon arriving at some explanation concerning it. But the very hubbub and confusion which reigned were of infinite use to him in regard to his projected scheme with the pretty Ellen Harmer. Her father, the miller, and the whole of the villagers, as we have seen, were thoroughly aroused and greatly incensed at the behavior of Jonas. Some began to talk of hanging the unlucky servant on the morrow, and dark as it was, they gathered together in groups, discussing the subject with great animation and many angry gestures. But this very confusion assisted the bold, conscienceless colonel. He walked up to the miller's house, and found it deserted. Not a soul was in the dwelling, save Ellen herself. Half stupefied with the strange story she had heard, Ellen remained in her own chamber, trembling that the skeleton crew were in the village. A single lamp burned dimly in the miller's parlor. Colonel Blood, as he crept towards the house, felt satisfied that she was alone. "Now is my time," said he. "None but the brave deserve the fair, now or never." He walked boldly into the house, opened the parlor door hastily, and entered the apartment. Ellen had been on her knees praying, and her face was deadly pale. She started suddenly as she saw the handsome stranger enter. "Fly! Fly for your life, fair maid," said Blood, in accents of alarm. "What means this intrusion, sir?" said Ellen, drawing herself up to her full height, and with a proud look. "What means this strange intrusion?" "It means this, Miss Harmer, that the village has been set upon by that desperate gang called the Skeleton Crew, and that they are intent upon murdering all who oppose them. Fly! I beg of you, do not delay a single instant, or all may be lost." "Sir!" cried Ellen, half aloud, distrustful of her own senses, and yet knowing not whether to believe or disbelieve the colonel's words. "Nay, stop not to parley, dear Ellen," said Blood, taking her by the hand. "There is not a single moment to be lost in explanation. Feel satisfied that what I say is true. Your father has sent me. He begged of me to conduct you to a place of safety until such times as the horrible skeleton band should have departed again. Sir, all this may be true, but how am I to know it for a certainty? Nay, do not hesitate. Your very life may depend upon it. And my honor also, sir," said Ellen, with a proud look. "Honor to me is dearer than life." "Great patience," said Blood, in a petulant manner. "Would you not save your father's life?" "My father's life?" said Ellen, suddenly changing color. "Is he in danger then?" "He is. He is now in the power of the Skeleton Crew, and if you are found here 5 minutes longer you will surely be dragged off a captive by Deathwing, their chief." "Whither, then, would you lead me?" "To Darlington Hall. Sir Richard and his servants are out and armed against this famous band. It is by old Sir Richard's desire, coupled with your father's, that I now come here." "Then you are known to Sir Richard?" "Yes, fair one. I am a nephew of his. I have used deception with you up to the present, but the time is now past for all that. I am Sir Richard's nephew. Come, fly with me to the hall, 'tis the only place of safety. Remember the dreadful scenes which have been enacted round the coast by this horrible band, and flee on the instant." Ellen seemed stupefied by all she heard, and mechanically threw a light wrapper round her shoulders. In a few moments she left her father's house, misled and deceived by the oily tongue of as great and fearless a scoundrel as ever lived. This way," said Blood blandly. "Haste, fair one, haste!" He placed a rough, strong arm round the maiden's waist, and helped her along. "This way is the nearest," he said, with a grim smile of satisfaction, as they both hurriedly approached the mill bridge. When they were about to cross, several of the planks being old, loose, and rotten, began to creak ominously, and the wind sighed dolefully. Ellen stopped for a moment. Her eyes enlarged to twice their ordinary size. She saw something on the bridge that startled her. "What is that?" she said, half gasping, pointing to something on the planks which looked red. "Oh! Nothing, nothing, fair one," said Blood, grimly smiling. "But it is something," said Ellen, turning pale, and gazing intently. "Look! See here, and here, they are large clots of gore. Impossible, said Blood coolly. Yes, they are, and here, she said, is part of a broken sword. How came all this? Nay, do not hurry me onward. I tremble, my feet refuse to walk, for I fear something horrible may obstruct my path. Nonsense! Nonsense, fair creature, said Blood. If anything has happened, it is all the doings of that horrible band of skeletons. Nothing more. If you wish to escape yourself, follow my advice at once. I will, said Ellen Harmer, trembling in every limb. She and the colonel had crossed half of the bridge when both suddenly stopped. What was that? Said the miller's daughter, looking pale as death. What voice was that? Oh, nothing, fair one. 'Twas only the murmuring of the wind among the osiers on the river bank, or perhaps the babbling waters. Come, quickly, I say! Oh, help! Murder! Sighed a voice nearby among the osier bushes. D-nation! Growled Blood, half to himself. That lout is still alive! Would for 1,000 crowns he were dead! Come, lassie, think no more of it. It was your imagination only, nothing else, I assure you. Oh, help! Sighed the voice again, faintly. Ellen Harmer, I am dying! Beware of the courtly villain! Help! 'Tis my name that he calls, said Ellen, turning red. Unhand me, sir, and if you are a man, help me to discover who and what this poor creature is. Help! Faintly sighed the voice from among the trees. 'Tis the voice of Andrew, said Ellen. Some foul villainy has been here at work. This blood upon the planks is his. Help! 'Tis Andrew Gamble's voice. D-nation! Growled Blood, and then, in a persuasive voice, Come, fair one, come, 'tis all imagination, believe me. Hark! Do you hear the loud shouts of the villagers? Come, let's haste away, the skeleton crew are butchering all they fall across. Come, haste! Blood put his strong arm round Ellen's waist, and half by persuasion, half by force, bore her away, pale, trembling, and more dead than alive. Egad, 'twas well I used mild force with the pretty wench, said he, or she would have discovered all. I must return, if possible, and give that rustic a finishing touch. It will never do to let him recover and go babbling over the village, or we may be traced to London, and then all fun would end. 'Twas lucky she didn't look in the right direction as I did, or she would have seen Master Andrew washed by the river among the bulrushes on the bank. I just caught sight of his face in the fitful moonlight. How white and horrible it looked! He was so impatient to bear off Ellen Harmer to his carriage that he actually took her up in his arms. This he explained to the struggling maid by saying that they were pursued. Faint, weak, pale, and unresisting as she was, Ellen Harmer was so terrified at all she had heard, that it took but little to convince her that what all Blood had said was true. With the soft tongue of a deceiver, then, he consoled her, while, with the strength of a young ox, he tore off his fair prize with the greatest ease. This is a good night's work, thought he, as he hurried forward. His Majesty will amply reward me for all this trouble, and who knows, may raise me to the peerage, for many a man has had that reward for doing less than I have. Thus he mused as he went on his way. Ere long he approached the spot where Jonas had agreed to place his carriage and horses. His own saddle horse was there, truly, but not the carriage. How is this? Growled Blood. Surely that fool, Jonas, could not have misunderstood me? I told him near this spot. He was now approaching the church, and resolved to wait near an old archway close beside the village green, with its maypole, until such time as Jonas should appear with the carriage. He remained close under the shadow of the old archway, but all was still. The village green, with its maypole, was deserted. Not a soul was visible. He threw his cloak around the miller's daughter, and tried to comfort her. All at once, he was astonished at the sight he saw. His own carriage dashed up, and passed him at a furious rate. The driver was a skeleton. Behind the carriage stood, in grim outlines, 2 skeleton footmen, cocked hats and all. Inside, Colonel Blood could see 4 or 5 skeletons, who grinned and laughed hideously as they looked out of the window, and shook their bony hands in triumph. In the midst of the inside passengers, Colonel Blood saw 2 prisoners. One was the colonel's coachman, the other was the fellow footman of poor Jonas. This unearthly and ghastly apparition was not seen by Ellen Harmer, for Blood's cloak had been adroitly thrown over her head and face the moment the strange and horrible coachman appeared in sight. It must be confessed that this coachload of grim skeletons filled the colonel with wonder, if not with fear. "I should never have believed it had I not seen it," mused the bold colonel. At that moment his horror even increased tenfold, as was that of the fair Ellen. Loud laughter was heard proceeding from the village green. It sounded not like that of mortal. He hastily turned his head, as also did Ellen. They both looked through the old archway towards the maypole. The sight they then beheld was appalling. Round the maypole danced a circle of skeletons. On top of it there sat perched a grim-looking skeleton, playing ear-piercing, diabolical music from some sort of flute made out of human bones. One of the dancers had a tambourine, with jingling bells. As they danced and capered about in most fantastic styles, they shook their bony hands in a dismal manner, which made Colonel Blood's flesh to creep again. Directly Ellen Harmer caught sight of this dreadful exhibition, she fell back into Blood's arms. She now fully believed all that the colonel had told her, and relied upon his protection as a man of honor. She was too much frightened to speak, and trembled violently as the colonel supported her. But Blood seemed fastened to the spot. He looked, and looked again at the terrible dance of the skeletons. He had never dreamed of ever seeing anything so hideous or horrible. "Who and what are they?" said Blood, half aloud. "Are they men or devils?" "Devils," said a chorus of unseen voices. "Who stabbed Andrew Gamble?" "Ha ha! Who wants to run away with the pretty daughter of Harmer the miller, eh? Go, tell your master what you have seen, go, tell him, he may one day expect us. Away, Colonel Blood, away!" These words were uttered in such fierce tones, and with such a hissing sound, that they grated on Blood's ears. "I fear not man nor devil," he growled savagely in return. But the continual sight of the strange, wild, skeleton dance seemed to discompose him. He seized Ellen Harmer round the waist, and with the greatest ease vaulted into his saddle. "These devils have seized my carriage and servants," said he, "but 'tis lucky they did not discover my horse here under the gateway, or all would have been lost." While in the act of mounting his splendid animal, the colonel did not perceive that the skeleton dancers had approached him. When he looked to the right and left he found himself surrounded by the grim disciples of Deathwing, the grim skeleton chief. With a shout, and an oath of surprise and annoyance, he raised his riding whip and cut his way from the midst of those around him. He put spurs to his horse, and plunged forward on the road towards London, with Ellen Harmer on the saddle before him. He had not gone 2 miles when he turned round to ascertain the cause of a distant rumbling noise. Not far behind him, he could perceive his own carriage, driven by a skeleton coachman, in full pursuit. Skeleton heads were protruding from windows on each side of the coach, who waved their long arms and shook them in gestures of savage revenge. "Pursued," thought Blood, "and by this terrible band." He dug his spurs deeply into the flanks of his gallant steed, and fled like the wind. But the skeleton band was slowly and surely gaining on him. It was now a race for life or death. Chapter 12. Wildfire Ned, Tim, and Rambling Bob set out upon their travels, strange and exciting adventures. The first thing which Wildfire Ned did, when he left his uncle's presence, and had publicly insulted Redgill, was to proceed to the stables, and saddle his own gallant mare, Starlight. "What, off again, Master Ned?" said Tim, rubbing his eyes. "Why, surely you ain't going anywhere this time of night?" "Yes, I am, Tim. I am going to leave Darlington altogether." "Leave it altogether, sir? Why, you must be joking." "No, I'm not, Tim. Come, saddle my mare at once. I must leave this place within half an hour. Will you come with me?" "Why, in course I will," said Tim. "But it did appear to me all so very strange-like. I can't understand it." "What? You leave the hall, and all for nothing?" said Tim, in great surprise. "Never mind being surprised at all about it," said Wildfire Ned, biting his lips. "I'm going to leave, so that's quite sufficient explanation. I've got a good sum of money of my own in my pocket, so have resolved to go to sea, and chase those skeleton pirates we have heard so much of. Will you come, Tim?" Yes, young master, in course I will. I'd go to the devil with you, thee knows. But for all that, thought Tim, I don't much care about facing them terrible skeletons led on by that awful wretch called Deathwing. Few words were passed by Ned. He mounted his famous mare, Starlight, and followed by Tim, galloped away towards the village of Darlington. Tim, are you brave? Said Wildfire Ned, grinning, as they rode along side by side. Brave, Master Ned, why of course I am. I'd face the very devil if I had any one to back me. I always feel safe when I'm with you. Well, do you know what I'm going to do? No, master. You know Bob Bertram? The old farmer's son, sir? Yes, sir, and a fine good-hearted young fellow he is as ever was born. I'm glad to hear you say so, Tim, and glad also to think you like him so much, for he, also, is coming with us. Him, master? Said Tim in surprise. Why, how can that be? He's in the roundhouse, and accused of murdering his old father. But he didn't do it, I'll swear, said Tim to himself. He couldn't do it. Bob Bertram's heart is too good for any such bloody work as that, or else I'm no judge of human nature. Right, Tim, you are right, my lad, said Ned, who had overheard his servant mumbling to himself. And I feel proud to think your opinion about that murder is the same as mine, but then, you know, he'll never suffer. He's going to escape tonight. Escape, master? Why, I have heard that he's guarded night and day. It were even whispered that some officers of the Crown were coming down to take him down to London. I have heard all that also, said Ned, laughing. But when they do come, the bird will have flown. Do you see these, Tim? Said Ned, displaying a pair of pistols. Do you see these? Yes, master. Well, we call these things barking irons, and if the two officers won't behave themselves, and act civilly towards us when we call, why then you must blow the brains out of one, while I do the same to the other. Ned said this very coolly, but Tim's eyes rolled in fright at the bare idea of bloodshed. He did not give utterance to his fears, however, but jogged along by his young master's side. Ere long they approached the village, and Wildfire Ned leaped from his mare. Tim did likewise, and both nags were tethered to a roadside post. Come along, Tim, we must do the rest on foot. You know the Red Lion? Well, go there, and tell the landlord I want a horse for a few hours. When you come back I shall be here at this post waiting for you. Be quick, mind, and see that he lends you a good steed, for we have a long way to gallop. Tim went off on foot towards the Red Lion. Wildfire Ned walked rapidly towards that part of the village where the lock-up or roundhouse was situated. All was darkness and profound quietness in the village. This is just the time to do the trick, thought Wildfire Ned. Saying this, he put on a black velvet mask, and walked up to the prison door. It was open. He walked in quietly. Two officers lay on benches before the fire, snoring loudly. They did not hear his footsteps. Ned looked around quickly to ascertain in which of the several cells Bob Bertram was confined. He knew not which. Presently, however, he saw two eyes peering between the iron bars, and from the hard breathing of the prisoner he felt sure it was Bob. Ned made a sign which Bob understood, and then approached the prisoner. "Those are the keys hanging up behind the door," said Bob in a soft whisper. "But be careful, Ned, or you will awake them." On tiptoe Wildfire Ned took down the keys, and approached Bob's cell. He passed them through to Bob, and while he was turning the bolt of the lock Wildfire Ned stood over the two sleeping officers, pistol in hand. "If they should wake up while Bob is getting out, these two little bulldogs will keep them quiet," thought Ned. He had not thus stood guard over the two slumberers many minutes ere Bob Bertram was free. "Fly," said Ned, "towards the hall. You'll find the horses waiting for us on the roadside near the finger posts." Young Bertram had scarcely quitted the prison ere the two officers awoke. They opened their eyes very slowly, but when they discovered the young man in the mask standing over them, pistol in hand, they rolled their eyes, and gaped in astonishment and wonder. "Oh, Lors! Who are you? Put down them pistols. What do you want? Did you not expect some officers from London?" "We did. But for the Lord's sake, don't put the muzzle of that pistol so near my head, it might go off." "I am one of them," said Ned, scarcely able to keep from laughing, "and have a very disagreeable duty to perform." "What is it?" My comrades called here, and found you asleep. We took the prisoner in our own charge, and my duty here is to lock both of you up. Lock us up? Yes, both of you, and to feed you on bread and water for a month, for not attending to your duty. It weren't my fault, it were his watch, said one. No quarreling, said Ned, grinning under his mask. Rise, both of you. Bob Bertram's cell is now open and empty. Go into it, both of ye, and this instant, knaves, or I'll drive holes into each of you. Ned's manner was so firm, cool, and determined, that the two astonished officers were compelled to obey him. Reluctantly they rose, and hobbled after each other into the cell. Ned turned the key upon them, and there left them alone in their glory. If either of you make any noise for the next half-hour I'll clip your ears off, said Ned, as he walked coolly away. He had not gone many yards ere both of the officers began to bawl at the top of their voices. Ned returned to them, and just placed the muzzle of his pistol between the bars, when the two officers fell upon their knees and sued for mercy in a very humble manner. I only asked you to remain quiet for half an hour before, said he. But now listen to me. If either of you make the slightest noise for the next 12 hours I will blow your brains out. Remember, and rest assured if you do not obey me this time both of you are dead men. Ned left them a second time, but did not forget to bolt and bar and lock every door, so that it was a matter almost of impossibility for either of them to escape, or even be heard by any one passing outside. In less than half an hour Wildfire, Ned, Bob Bertram, and Tim were on their way to the sea-coast. But ere they reached their journey's end a strange adventure happened to Wildfire Ned. Each of them were well mounted, and they galloped along the road at a merry pace. Bob Bertram was in ecstasies at his unlooked-for liberation, and swore eternal friendship and fidelity to Wildfire Ned. He told Ned all, or at least as much as he knew, about his father's murder, and what had happened to him on that eventful night. He also described the stranger who had exchanged clothes with him so minutely that Ned could not, or at least did not, for a moment hesitate to say that Redgill was the man, for he knew that from the garments Bob was then wearing. He did not say much to Bob concerning it, however, but bit his lip, and vowed to have revenge on Redgill the first opportunity that offered. The three riders stopped at a roadside inn, and knocked up the landlord. The old man opened his door with a trembling hand, and in the course of conversation informed his guests that they must beware of the skeleton crew, for a party of that terrible band had called there that very night, ransacked and robbed the place of all it had, and were well-nigh murdering everybody. Was Deathwing, their chief, along with them? Asked Ned. He was, said the old publican, shaking. But oh! Young man, don't smile, for if you had been as close to, and seen as much on him as I have tonight, you would tremble in your shoes. I, said Wildfire Ned, laughing boisterously. Not I, landlord, you are much mistaken. Nothing in the world would give me greater pleasure than to meet this same Deathwing tonight. You, said the publican aghast. Rash youth, beware! Nay, you need have no fears for me. It is my resolve to beard the lion in his very den this very night. Think you they are on the heath? Without doubt, young master, they are, but take an old man's advice, do not go near them. When you catch but a glimpse of their horrid forms, flee for your lives. Never mind, friend, never mind this skeleton crew. Bring us a bottle or two of your best wine, said Ned. If I do not unearth the hobgoblin devils tonight, my name is not Ned Warbeck. Warbeck? Said the old man, in surprise. Warbeck? Yes, Warbeck. What makes you look so surprised? They were speaking of you, said the old man, turning pale. Well, what of that? They drank to your death. To my death? Said Ned. What else, old man? They vowed to hunt you down and slay you. Ah, said Ned. And why? What have I done more than any one else to deserve such kind consideration? I know not, young man. All I heard them say was that, at the moment of your birth, some infernal power told them that you were sent to be their deadliest enemy on land and sea. So be it then, said Ned. If I have any strength or power or will, I will use it all against these demons, and never rest until I have exterminated every one of them. While Ned spoke thus, the old landlord, who was about to leave the room, hastily returned. What makes you so pale, old man? Asked Ned. The publican did not reply. He seemed struck dumb with astonishment. At the door stood 2 of the skeleton crew. They walked slowly into the room, and looked at Wildfire Ned with a long, steadfast gaze. Ned jumped to his feet, and quick as thought fired both pistols at them. The balls could be heard rattling through their bones. But they stirred not. With a laugh, loud and mocking, they seized him by his arms, and would have borne him away. Tim, almost in a jelly with fear, wriggled and writhed like an eel. The skeletons swung Tim to and fro for a second or two, and then threw him with great violence into a corner near the coal cellar, and there he lay very humbly and meekly, and did not dare stir an inch. "Are such the men, young Warbeck?" said the 2 skeletons. "You would gather round ye to slaughter the Deathwing's band?" "No, foul fiends," said Ned, rising and brandishing his sword. "Such are not the men, but here are 2. I and young Bertram here defy all your power." "Foolish boy," said one, in tones of mock compassion. "I would not harm ye. Yet, when you have arrived at man's estate, I might meet you on equal terms." "Nay, let not that be your vain excuse," said Ned. "Old or young I defy you, and in token of my eternal hatred take that," said he, at the same moment throwing his glove at the skeleton face. "Impudent varlet!" was the angry rejoinder. "It seems as if your footsteps were purposely directed across my path. I know, I feel, that eternal, unquenchable hatred exists between us, and yet not now would I cross swords with ye. But think not, bold youth, that I reject your gage of battle. No, I accept it. Beneath the old oak, on the moor, meet me in an hour. I will, and with greater pleasure than e'er I did aught in all my life. Until the hour, then, adieu. You will, of course, come alone?" "I will." These few angry words were quickly spoken, and before any one could well realize the fact, the 2 grim skeletons disappeared. They mounted 2 horses that stood outside the inn door, and vanished like the wind. "Thank heavens, they are gone!" the publican gasped. "Amen!" groaned Tim. "But you surely will not keep your promise with the grim rascals?" said Bob. "I most surely shall," said Ned. "But they mean you mischief," said the publican. "You will never return alive. You need not fear." "But, brave youth, I do fear. You know not so much of these awful creatures as I do." "Perhaps not, but I shall very shortly," said Ned, laughing. "Why, that old oak tree on the heath is the favorite spot of Deathwing, their chief. So much the better, the sooner I shall make his acquaintance then, that's all. But there are, at least, a dozen dead men hanging on the leafless branches. All have fallen victims to Deathwing's sword, and now hang rotting in the sun. So I have heard. Will you be kind enough to show me the way thither, landlord?" asked Ned, smiling. "Me? Lord bless the lad, I wouldn't go near that tree for all the gold in England. No one ever comes back alive from that spot." "Then I will go alone." "Nay, stay." "You must not go, Ned," said Bob. "Why throw yourself in the way of those bloodthirsty scoundrels? If you do go, I must accompany you, and so will your groom, Tim?" "Why, yes," groaned Tim, who was rubbing his sore bones with a very rueful face. "I don't mind if I go to the devil, for I'm going there very fast, it seems to me." With a face flushed with excitement, and eyes sparkling with delight at the prospect of encountering someone of the skeleton crew in mortal combat, Wildfire Ned rose from his seat and paced the room. Before he was perceived, Ned left the apartment in a free and easy manner, as if merely going into the backyard. Bob Bertram never imagined that Ned had any intentions of going forth alone. The old landlord saw him mount his horse, and turned pale as he thought of the great danger into which the bold, rash youth was about to plunge. "For heaven's sake," said old Boniface, approaching Ned, "for heaven's sake, give up this wild freak. How can you, a mere lad, think of conquering any one of that desperate gang when so many valiant men have fallen in the attempt? Take my advice, Ned Warbeck, steer clear of that murdering crew." "Look here, landlord," said Ned gaily. "There is one favor I have to ask of you, and that is, keep a still tongue in your head. I shall only be absent an hour or 2 at most. Do not tell my comrades which way I have gone should they ask, but say you think I have gone towards the hall for something I have left behind. Do this, and I shall well repay you in times to come." So speaking, Wildfire Ned dashed away into a neighboring thicket, and was soon lost to view. In a few moments he emerged again into the open country. Over bridge and ditch he gaily rode, humming a tune. The moon came out, and shone with unusual splendor. Ere long he approached the borders of the lonely heath, which, like a white expanse of silvered scenery, lay open before him. His brave mare Starlight had carried him nobly, but from pure instinct began to snort and slacken her pace as she approached the wilderness-like plain. In the far distance Wildfire Ned saw ravenous night birds circling in the sky, and alighting on a huge oak tree. As he approached still nearer his mare stood still, and cocked her ears. Ned now had a full view of the famous old oak tree, and on its wide-spreading branches he distinctly saw dark rows of dead men hanging against the bright sky. The sight filled him with horror, but not with fear. "What inhuman scoundrels!" he sighed. "They must be fiends ever to act in this manner." Nothing daunted, he dismounted from his mare, and tied her to a stump. As he did so he heard a voice, which said, slowly and solemnly, "Edward Warbeck, beware! Retrace your steps, no one approaches the blasted oak and lives." "Lying fiends," said Wildfire Ned. "Lying fiends! Wherever you be, I fear not your crazy croakings." As he spoke fire flashed from his eyes, and he boldly advanced. Dry leaves rustled in the wind, the breezes sighed, and as he looked up at that fearful gibbet with its many human forms dangling in the air a sudden tremor thrilled his whole frame. The face of each hapless victim was turned downwards towards him, and they seemed to smile grimly and savagely at his upturned face. Beyond this, however, nothing was visible. "The sight is indeed horrible," said Ned half aloud. "But where is the much-vaunted skeleton crew? Where are these savages hidden? And whence came that voice of warning?" Wildfire Ned's position, as must be confessed, was a critical one. Here was a bold youth, alone and single-handed, gazing on the dead, and standing, as it were, on enchanted ground. "Come forth, grim demons of the land and deep," said Ned, with a ringing defiant tone. "Deathwing, come forth and encounter me!" He turned his head suddenly. There stood before him a gaunt, ghastly member of the skeleton band, sword in hand. "Who calls so bravely on the skeleton crew, and defies them?" said a sepulchral voice, in mocking tones. "Is Deathwing's band to be laughed and scoffed at by a babbling boy?" "Boy," said Ned indignantly. "Yes, brat, if that will suit your pride the better, get you gone from this awful place. I came by appointment. Deathwing and I are to try conclusions to a deadly issue here," said Ned bravely. "You face Deathwing?" said the skeleton guard, with a mocking laugh. "He who has braved the land and sea this many a year, ha! Ha! Look above ye, and see there dangling the lifeless bodies of more than a dozen who have dared intrude upon this deadly spot." "Bombastic liar!" said Ned in tones of scorn. "Deathwing fears me. But, at all events, I will not be disappointed. These rows of bodies shall no longer grace these oak branches as tokens of your prowess. Have at ye! Man or fiend, my good battle-axe shall prove to all what ye are." With a desperate rush Wildfire Ned dashed to the fray. The skeleton guardian of the gibbet, however, was not taken unawares. He also was armed, and parried Ned's desperate blows. The combat was a fearful one. Sparks flew from their weapons. Wildfire Ned, with the courage and endurance of a dozen men, stood his ground. His blows fell thick and fast upon his grim opponent, and the clash of marrowless bones resounded upon the night air. For a moment Wildfire Ned paused in the combat, and looked upon his opponent with wonder. "He must be a devil," thought Ned, "or my last blow would have cleaved him to the earth." "Ha! Ha!" growled the skeleton, as he rushed at his enemy again. "One more victim for our gibbet!" "Never!" said Ned aloud, and with an angry oath. The fight was again renewed, and now with still greater bitterness and fury. Ned was getting weaker and weaker. His rival, however, danced around him as nimbly as ever, and every limb seemed to be acting on springs. He struck at Ned repeatedly, but could not do more than draw blood. It seemed impossible to hit Ned Warbeck in any vital part, for he was so well guarded with his weapon. He bled, however, as we have said, and the sight of gore seemed to act like electricity on the skeleton guard, who shrieked aloud with joy. He made a terrific dash, a last and final attempt upon Ned, and shouted aloud, Edward Warbeck, die! Down, down! Die! Never! Said Ned, as with a well-aimed and powerful blow he struck his opponent fair on the head, and felled him to the earth. Conquered, conquered! Shouted Ned aloud in wild triumph. He turned to look for his smitten foe. He was nowhere to be seen. Astonished as he was at this strange occurrence, he was much more astounded at what he then heard. While looking about in search of some trace of his grim, gaunt opponent, the sounds of pistol shots and loud shouts reached his ears. He listened. Again and again he could distinctly discern quick, successive reports of firearms. Help! Help! Faintly sighed the breeze. What is all this? What new wonder is to happen on this eventful night? Thought Ned. At that moment his good mare Starlight neighed and became restive. Hello? What means this? The mare would not neigh without cause. There is someone in danger. The mare recognizes some old stable companion. I will away, and quickly return. Help! Help! Was borne upon the breeze. In a moment Wildfire Ned vaulted into the saddle and dashed forward to the scene of strife and danger. The report of firearms to Wildfire Ned was like the sounds of most delightful music. His heart leaped within him as he mounted his brave mare Starlight. Heaven grant it may turn out to be some more of these skeleton devils, he said with a merry laugh. Over hedge and ditch he galloped in the clear moonlight, and soon reached the high road. In the far distance he could perceive a carriage and four, which had been stopped by a party of Rhodes men. Egad, said Ned, this is another adventure tonight. I must not let poor travelers be waylaid and robbed by rascally highwaymen if I can help it. He rode straight towards the crowd, and as he approached, perceived the carriage to be that of his uncle. Old Sir Richard Warbeck, it would seem, had started out after Wildfire Ned, in hopes of bringing him back to Darlington Hall. Philip Redgill, who had professed much friendship for the wayward lad Ned, volunteered to accompany Sir Richard to town. But they had not progressed far when the carriage was attacked by Captain Jack's party of horsemen, who had resolved not to leave the neighborhood of Darlington without spoil of some kind. Hence, when they sneaked off from the inn in which Colonel Blood was, they were so enraged at being thus made fools of, that they determined to have revenge on some of the landed gentry thereabout. The first person to fall across them was Sir Richard Warbeck and Philip Redgill. Captain Jack's men massed themselves, and counted upon an easy conquest. But they were much mistaken. Old Sir Richard, the moment he was attacked by the ruffians, fired his pistols through the coach windows, and wounded one or two of the rascals, old Bates among the number. Jumping out of the coach, sword in hand, he kept his assailants at bay, manfully and bravely. Philip Redgill, however, slipped out of the coach by the opposite door, and soon made his escape unharmed. As he was fleeing, Captain Jack overtook him. 1,000 gold guineas if you slay the alderman, said Redgill in a confidential whisper. Done, said Captain Jack. Redgill gave the robber chief a large purse, and promised the rest at a certain time and place in London. In a few moments Redgill mounted one of the robbers' horses, and galloped away unperceived by old Sir Richard, who thought Philip had been killed or desperately wounded. No quarter, lads, no quarter, said Captain Jack. The old baronet fights like a fiend. He has wounded several already. No quarter, lads, no quarter. It was at this moment, when surrounded by Captain Jack's desperate men, and each moment in expectation of being killed, that Wildfire Ned darted upon the spot full speed. Bang! Bang! Went his pistols right and left as he approached. Whipping out his sword, he spurred Starlight into a maddening gallop, and actually rode down all before him. Captain Jack was unhorsed in an instant, and rolled into the ditch with a loud curse. Old Sir Richard was astonished at the dash and valor of the youth before him, but from the mask which Ned wore it was impossible for him to detect his nephew. Wildfire Ned was too busy with those around him to pass any compliments or exchange recognition. The fight now was between the highwaymen on the one side, and Sir Richard and Wildfire Ned on the other. Sir Richard, however, was on foot, and could not do so much as Ned, who pranced and danced around on Starlight, cutting and slashing in gallant style. Perceiving that several of the highwaymen were disabled, and had left the spot, the coachman and footman emerged from their hiding place under the hedge, whither they had at first fled. With thick clubs in hand, they now joined the fight, and laid about them with such right goodwill, so that Captain Jack and his party were only too glad to escape with their lives. As soon as the fight was over, and Sir Richard could gain sufficient strength, he tottered up to Wildfire Ned, and said, "Gallant youth, whoever you are, how can I sufficiently thank you for your timely aid? I had a fellow traveler with me, a noble young man of unstained honor, but I fear he has fallen a victim to these scoundrels who attacked me. Your name, I beg, young man, your name, that I may recount your noble deeds this night to the king." "Sir Richard Warbeck," Ned replied, with a forced utterance and a feigned voice. "No thanks are needed, I have simply done my duty. My name you cannot, must not, at the present know, for I have not made a name for fame as yet. When I have done so, however, you will hear of me at Darlington Hall." With a low bow to Sir Richard, Wildfire Ned galloped from the spot, in pursuit of the fleeing highwayman. "Lord mercy me, master," gasped the coachman. "Didn't thee know on?" "I do." "Ah, Sir Richard, it be Wildfire Ned," said the footman. "He were disguised, but I could swear to it when I seed him ride. There's not another lad in all England as can straddle a saddle like Ned, Sir Richard," the coachman remarked. "What? Am I blind?" Sir Richard said. "Could that brave lad have been no other than my own Ned? Am I dreaming? And yet all along through the fight my heart told me so. Brave boy!" he sighed. And as he spoke, true tears trickled down the old man's cheeks, for he dearly loved Ned. "Harness the horses quick," he said. "If that be Ned, I must overtake him. Quick, I say, and harness the horses. Drive for your very lives. I will, overtake the gallant youth." Chapter 13. Captain Jack and Redgill miscalculate their forces, the recognition, the rescue, Bob Bertram's escape. Captain Jack and his half-dozen companions were so thoroughly disappointed and disgusted with their ill success in and around Darlington, that they made up their minds to depart for London forthwith, and seek no other adventures. Their disabled companion shared the horse of Faulkner, and as they journeyed slowly along to the nearest public house, the whole party were loud in cursing their late bad luck. "Who the devil could have been that youngster who assailed us so furiously?" said Captain Jack, with an angry oath. "I tried to wing him several times, but always missed." "Yes, hang him, but he took good care he didn't miss me," old Bates growled. "He knocked the pistol out of my hand as clean as a whistle, and just at the moment, too, when I was going to pop at him. As to handling a sword," said Captain Jack, "he seems the very devil at that game." "I thought that I could do a little in that line," said Faulkner. "But, Lord bless yer, he gave me an awful dig in the left arm, and if it hadn't been for a stroke of good luck I should have been killed, for he was just on the point of having a full cut at me, when I ducked my head, and—" "Yes, and that stroke cut down a thick branch much tougher than your head or neck," said Bates. "I saw it, so cut it, for I had enough on it." While thus speaking of their inglorious exploit, Jack's party arrived at the roadside inn, where, it will be remembered, Wildfire Ned had left Bob Bertram and Tim. Believing what the landlord had said to them, namely, that Ned Warbeck had only ridden back to the hall for something he had forgotten, Bob and Tim waited patiently for his return. When least they expected it, however, and greatly to the surprise of both, Captain Jack and his rough companions entered the inn, and with their old style, swaggered about and talked and cursed very loudly. Tim, by instinct, knew who they were, and trembled. He slunk into the dark corner still farther, so as not to be perceived, but Bob Bertram remained cool and collected. Captain Jack called for various refreshments, and together with a companion or two, were very busy in binding up the cuts and wounds of those who were hurt. "You seem to have fallen into rough hands, gentlemen," said Bob civilly. "Well, and what if we have?" Bates growled. "Is that anything to do why you? Who are you?" "Keep your temper, Bates," said Captain Jack. "Let's have no more quarreling tonight. The young man didn't mean any harm." "Quite true, gentlemen, quite true. We are two of the civilest fellows as ever was," Tim began. "And who asked you to speak?" Bates growled, in such a wicked manner as made Tim stop on the instant. "Misfortune follows misfortune," sighed Tim to himself. "It is out of the frying pan into the fire. When will all these strange ups and downs cease? The truth is, young man, said Captain Jack to Bob Bertram, after he had bandaged his comrade's wounds. "The truth is, as you say, we have fallen into rough hands tonight, very rough hands indeed. Did you ever hear of a person hereabouts called Bob Bertram?" "Yes, I think I have," said Bob coolly. "What of that?" "Well, it's all through him that we've got all these cuts and wounds." "Indeed?" "Yes," said Captain Jack, inventing lies as he went on. "We are officers of the Crown, and were sent to escort this Bob Bertram to London, but he escaped just in time. We got scent of where he was hiding, and overtook the carriage in which he was escaping. Like brave men and good officers, we attacked it, but just as we were on the point of securing the rascal, out pounces a score of villains upon us from a wood. After a desperate encounter we killed and wounded a great many, but were at last compelled to fly, for the whole village was at our heels." "Indeed?" said Bob in wonder. "But are you sure that the person in the carriage really was Bob Bertram?" "Not a doubt of it," said Captain Jack, pleased with his well-told string of lies. During this conversation, and while Jack was dilating at great length upon the bravery of himself and comrades, a stranger entered the room and took a seat on the dark side of the fireplace. Bob and Tim exchanged quick looks at one another on the stranger's entrance. It was not Wildfire Ned. Who, then, could it be? It was Philip Redhill. The place where he sat was shaded from the firelight so completely that he had a good view of each person's countenance, but yet no one saw his own. "You are mistaken, my friend," said Redhill, at the conclusion of Captain Jack's remarks. "You are mistaken. The murderer, Bob Bertram, was not in the carriage at all." "No." "Who dared dispute our word?" "Who told you so?" said Bates, Faulkner, and Captain Jack in a breath, and in tones of annoyance. "I did," said Redhill, rising. "The murderer was not near the spot." "Not near the place?" "No. He was sitting quietly in the parlor of a roadside and during the whole of the fight." "Prove it." "Do you want to make us all out liars, then?" "I can prove it," said Redhill, all the time speaking in a forced voice, quite unnatural to him. "And if you put me to the test, I can tell you where the murderer is now at this present moment." "Ha! Where?" "There's a good reward offered, tell us at once," said Captain Jack and others. "You have not to look far for him," said Redhill, with a triumphant laugh. Bob Bertram's blood now ran cold. "I am betrayed," he thought, "and must fight my way out of this." "And who told you?" said Bates. "A youth called Ned Warbeck. I met him on the road. He has been to this inn once tonight, has he not, landlord?" "I believe he has," was the innkeeper's answer. "But where is this Bob Bertram, then?" said Captain Jack impatiently. "There," said Redhill, pointing to where Bob Bertram sat. "I know him, so does the landlord, and so does that thin-legged groom in the corner." But they held their peace. "Scoundrel!" said Bob Bertram, rising instantly. "Scoundrel!" he said, and fired at the informer. Redhill anticipated something of this sort, and dodged so cleverly that the shot missed its aim. In a second Bob Bertram was surrounded by Captain Jack's party. He fought most manfully to get loose from his assailants, but they were too numerous for him. Besides that, his confinement and anxiety for the past few days had weakened him very much, so that he did not at the moment possess 1/3 of his ordinary strength. Old Bates was the first who dared to assail Bob, but a well-directed blow, clean from the shoulder, knocked the red-nosed rascal off his legs. Right manfully did Bob fight, but it was all to no purpose. He was bound with cords. Resistance was hopeless and useless. He cast a look at Redhill, a glance that was filled with venom and scorn. "Villain!" he said. "We have met before, bloodthirsty scoundrel! Do you remember the night of my father's murder, red-handed knave? You shall not always triumph. My day will come." "What does the rogue say?" Redhill remarked coolly. "Oh, never mind him, sir," said Captain Jack, recognizing in Redhill the young man who had escaped from the carriage and given him the purse of gold. "Never mind him, sir, he's only raving. All your great criminals rave and rant when officers lay their hands upon 'em. It's quite natural, just like pigs when they're going to be killed, they always squeal most then. Lord bless you, sir, we've had lots of criminals in hand in our time, ain't we, Bates?" "I believe yer," said that worthy. Turning to Bob, who was bound now with cords, he said, What do you mean by calling this 'ere gentleman names for, eh? Why, we knows him well, said Bates, in allusion to Redgill. If you do, said Bob, take care of him. He is the man who murdered my father, not me. His name is Bolton. Quite mistaken, said Captain Jack. His name ain't nothing of the sort, it is Mr. Philip Redgill. Quite true, said Philip, with a smile of contempt. And now that I have assisted you in recapturing this vile murderer, I will mount and journey to London. Quite right. Many thanks, my noble captain. A pleasant journey. Don't forget our appointment, said Redgill to Jack. I suppose he is dead as a herring, whispered Captain Jack. I shot the old un through the head, but we couldn't do much with the young un though, so had to hook it. Young un? Said Redgill, in surprise. What young un do you allude to? Why, that young Wildfire devil as came galloping and pistoling and slashing among us single-handed. Who could it have been? Said Redgill. Was he near my size? No, less than you, not near so strong, but Lord bless yer, he's as active as a cat, and rode a splendid mare he called Starlight. Starlight? Said Redgill. There is but one mare of that name around Darlington, and that one belongs to Wildfire, Ned, said young Warbeck, entering at the moment. Redgill turned pale as death, and averted his face. Tim and Bob Bertram were overjoyed at this unlooked-for arrival. Captain Jack and his party were thunderstruck. The devil! 'Tis he! The very one I spoke of. Edward Warbeck, gentleman, at your service, said Wildfire Ned, bowing. Cut the brat in two, said old Bates, with his eyes glaring in anger like two live coals. Cut the brat in two. Blow out his brains, the bastard, said Philip Redgill, feeling safe among so many friends. Blow out the bastard's brains, he said in a hissing tone. Down with him! Spare him not! HOLD, said Wildfire Ned, in a loud tone, and waving his hand in command. HOLD! I say! The first man that stirs shall fall by my sword. These words were said in such a clear, ringing tone, and with an air of such cool defiance that Captain Jack and his followers were astounded. Without a word of apology, Wildfire Ned cut the rope that bound Bob Bertram, and then said to Captain Jack, You are the leader of this party? I am, was the gruff reply. How dare you interfere with our prisoner, then? We are officers of justice. In justice, you should have said, Ned coolly replied, laughing. And if you are not all hung within a week, you owe it to my clemency. To you? Said Bates, with a curling lip. Yes, to me, old man. Nay, don't growl so. I fear you not, you cannot bite anyone. Think yourself very lucky that I do not punish your insolence on the spot. Ned's manner was so firm, cool, and brave, that it seemed to act like a spell on all present, for no one moved from where they stood or sat, but looked on with surprise and curiosity at what then took place. Walking up to Redgill, Ned said calmly, but in tones which all could hear. We have met again. We have, was the hoarse response of the dark villain, as he curled his lip in demon-like scorn. You called me bastard, said Wildfire Ned, in a tone of fiery anger. This is my answer. So speaking, he slapped Redgill in the face, and then spat upon him. Hollow! What's all this? He's struck our friend. Knock the brat down, said one and another. Keep your places, said Ned, with a look of scorn. The first man of you that dare interfere in this quarrel shall in less than a minute lie at my feet a bleeding corpse. Throwing off his cloak, he stood before Philip Redgill, sword in hand. Come on, said he. I told you we should meet again. Draw, I tell you, draw, villain, or I will slay you where you stand, Philip Redgill. He shall not fight, said Captain Jack. But if you will kick up a shindy, and insist upon bloodletting, why then, I will accommodate you. Yes, and I. And I. Wait, then, said Ned. Trust me, you shall all have your turn, but I will commence with this one first. Philip Redgill, draw. He did so, but with an air of great reluctance. Ned stood upon his guard. On the instant, however, and before he was aware of any treachery, Redgill fired at him. The ball grazed Ned's cheek. Cowardly hound! He cried, and rushed on his foe with the fury of a fiend. In an instant, the whole place was in an uproar. Bob Bertram, Tim, and the landlord were surrounded by Captain Jack's followers, and a deadly encounter took place. The clash of swords, the report of firearms, and the shouts and cries of all in the house, awoke wild echoes in the silent night. To add to the confusion, all the lights were overturned and extinguished. At the first opportunity, Master Tim crept under the table out of harm's way. But Bob, the publican, and Wildfire Ned pushed their antagonists so fiercely that in less than 10 minutes Philip Redgill was carried out into the yard bleeding and pale. Captain Jack and his men were thoroughly beaten, but they continued the fight outside the house, on the spacious green in front of the doorway. Here in the moonlight was seen the flash of swords, and heard the deep guttural curses of the antagonists. "We must get out of this at all costs," said Captain Jack to Faulkner. "All our chaps are wounded. We must beat a retreat once. Get our horses, Faulkner." Captain Jack vaulted upon one animal, Faulkner did so upon another. Just when about to start off, they were surprised to see a horseman approaching at a terrific gallop. In his arms he held a lovely female, whose snow-white garments were streaming in the wind. It was Colonel Blood with Ellen Harmer. In about 5 minutes Captain Jack and Faulkner were seized with horror at what they then saw. Colonel Blood's carriage, with its skeleton coachman and footman, and with weird wild skeleton forms inside, dashed past the inn door in pursuit, waving their bony arms and shrieking most hideously. This strange, unearthly spectacle seemed to fill all with horror. Even Wildfire Ned desisted from the combat, and gazed steadfastly upon the grim quartet as it passed the inn. Suddenly a piercing and uncommon cry was uttered by Philip Redgill as he turned his eyes towards the vehicle. The coach stopped. In an instant the skeleton descended from the box. Those inside alighted with great expedition, and weapon in hand, advanced towards the inn door. Wildfire Ned was astonished, but not dismayed. He bit his lip, and his eyes flashed fire. Without a word of warning the skeleton rushed upon him. Captain Jack and Faulkner spurred their horses away from the spot as speedily as possible. They did not stay a single moment longer to witness what took place. They only thought of their own safety, and galloped off as if they had suddenly confronted so many devils. One of the skeleton crew secured Redgill as he lay bleeding under a tree in the garden, and conveyed him to the coach. Tim did not much relish any fresh encounter whatever. Inspired with curiosity, and a keen desire to lay hands upon anything which the coach contained, he went up to the door, and peeped in. The suppliant cries of those inside affected Tim's heart, and he loosed them from their bondage by cutting the cords with which they had been bound. This he did, but only on condition of their promising to help his master, which the liberated coachman and footman swore most solemnly to do. When they stepped out of the carriage, however, they breathed very hard for a moment or two, and, seeing the fight going on all around them, took to their heels like lamplighters, nor even turned their heads. Up the road they ran, as nimbly as rabbits, until, breathless, and almost on the point of bursting a blood vessel, they fell headlong into a marshy pool, and lay there without attempting to move. Wildfire Ned, Bob Bertram, and the plucky innkeeper, however, had, up to this time, been busily engaged with their grim opponents. The publican had closed with one of them, and in fast embrace, were then wrestling on the ground. Bob Bertram used his sword with both hands, and, much to his delight, cut off the arm of one and leg of another. Judge of his astonishment and horror, however, when each of those grim worthies picked up his severed limb, and hobbled off towards the coach, perhaps there to reset them, for all he knew, since they never returned to the combat again. Ned, however, with his back to a tree, contended with two at once. With his good sword he hit right and left, first at one and then at another. But it seemed as if to no purpose, for as often as they were cleaved to the earth, they rose again, as nimbly as if they were made of india rubber and springs combined. "There's only one vulnerable part with these devils, I'm told," said Ned to himself, "and that is to fairly pierce them between the eyes and nose." With well-directed thrusts Wildfire Ned attempted this feat repeatedly, but failed, and his efforts were rewarded by loud derisive laughter by his enemies. At last he succeeded. With a wild, ear-piercing shriek, a grim monster fell to the earth, and his marrowless bones crashed together with an unearthly sound. "That's one of them," said Ned in high glee, but before he could utter another word, he saw approaching, right and left, a whole company of skeletons marching in great haste to the spot. "We shall all be massacred," said the innkeeper in horror. "The whole band are out tonight." "Fall back, lads, fall back," said Wildfire Ned. "Get into the house again, and let us bar the doors." This was quickly done, and greatly to Master Tim's annoyance, for he was now shut out. With the nimbleness of a cat he climbed up the water pipe into a chamber window. He could not get in very well, and hung outside for some moments, dangling just above the heads of the skeleton crew below. Ned pulled him in, however, and warded off several vicious blows aimed at Tim, which, had they struck him, must have killed him on the spot. "We are safe now for a time," said the innkeeper bravely. "But I fear they will burn us out. We shall be roasted alive." Tim heard this remark, and was seized with a wild frenzy. He threw chairs and crockery out upon the heads of those below, who, now very numerous, were clamoring at and endeavoring to burst in the door. "Set fire to the house," said Deathwing, who had now arrived. "Set fire to the house at once. They will soon cry for quarter, but give them none. As they rush out, kill them on the spot. We'll soon make them surrender." "Never," said Wildfire Ned, at an open window. "Never!" In a few moments, however, the house and stables were set fire to, and the skeleton crew, sure of consuming their foes, danced round and round in wild, unearthly joy. "Oh! Heaven protect us!" the innkeeper gasped. "We shall all be blown up." "What?" said Ned, never for a moment losing either coolness or courage. "Blown up, Mr. Warbeck," said the host. "I have 100 pounds of powder in a cellar which is situated a few yards before the front door." 100 pounds of powder?" said Bob. "Yes." "How came it here?" "Lieutenant Garnet and a party of sailors found it on the beach not many weeks ago. It was destined for the skeleton crew, but Lieutenant Garnet placed it here, saying he would call and remove it soon." "That's just the thing we want," said Ned in high glee. In a few moments Bob and Wildfire Ned descended into the cellar described, and, after putting a slow match to the barrel, firmly closed the cellar door, and returned again to the room above. Ned threw a rope out of window as if about to escape. This was noticed by those below, who hailed Ned's appearance at the window with derisive cheers as they brandished their weapons, and flung about their long white arms in a ghostly dance. "The fire is doing its work," said Deathwing in high glee. "We'll have revenge on the publican. He has always been an enemy of our crew, and a friend to Garnet. Look out, they will be burned out like rats in less than 5 minutes. Stand by, every one of you, ready to receive them as they jump out of the window. Let them fall on the points of your sword." When least they expected it, however, the powder exploded. The earth about 10 yards in front of the main doorway suddenly upheaved. An awful rush of fire succeeded. Many of the skeletons were blown into the air. This concussion was very great, and for a moment the house trembled as if it would crumble into dust. It did not, however. All in the house who had not laid themselves down on their faces were thrown off their legs. The windows were smashed. The doors flew open as if by magic. "Now's our time," said Ned, and followed by the innkeeper, Bob Bertram, and Tim, rushed out sword in hand. By the light of the burning dwelling and stables the fight was continued, and now more desperately than ever. Tim, in his hurry to rush out and get away, stumbled into the deep hole made by the explosion. He had scarcely reached the bottom, however, when one of Deathwing's band seized him, and almost squeezed him to death. Tim was now bound to fight or die, and as he much preferred the former condition of the two, he kicked and bit and fought like a tiger, each one of them rolling over one another by turns, and almost burying themselves in the loose earth. Wildfire Ned sought out Deathwing, but nowhere could that remorseless chief be found. He called upon him to stand forth and engage in deadly combat, but there was no response to this bold challenge. When least expected, however, and when in the fullness of his vigorous onslaught upon the grim gang, he, Wildfire Ned, was seized by someone from behind. A thrill of horror ran through his whole frame. Deathwing, with a loud shout of triumph, cried out, "Victory! Victory! Ned Warbeck is our prisoner!" "Liar!" Ned growled, and with a mighty effort released himself from Deathwing's grasp. They now stood face to face. That moment to each was momentous in the extreme. Each one was nerving himself up for the final struggle. Loud shouts now burst out upon Ned's delighted ears. With an irresistible rush, cutlass in hand, Lieutenant Garnet, with a brave band of blue jackets, dashed upon the scene. With a wild, joyous shout, such as British tars alone know how to give, Garnet's men pressed their way into the thickest of the fight. The combat now was a grand sight indeed. The night had turned to inky darkness. Not a star was visible. In the foreground was the mixed assemblage of fierce combatants. Blue jackets of the sailors mixed with the white, skeleton forms which danced hither and thither like ghosts in the darkness. All the background was brilliantly lighted up by the blazing tavern and conflagration of numerous stables. Wildfire, Ned, and Bob Bertram each took command of a party of sailors, and attacked Deathwing's gang in every direction. Deathwing mounted his coal-black charger, and endeavored to arouse his followers to greater efforts and more desperate acts of daring. Ned and Bob Bertram followed the example. Once on the back of Starlight, Ned felt more at home. Everywhere he sought to confront Deathwing. All his efforts were in vain. The skeleton chief seemed to be ubiquitous. Wherever he was seen at one moment he disappeared on the next. Beaten back at all points, Deathwing and his followers gave way. They gradually retreated towards a dangerous morass, and thence into a dense wood, whither it was deemed inadvisable to follow them. Indeed, it seemed impossible to follow them, for they disappeared like myths, or will-o'-the-wisps, in the marshy bog. When Lieutenant Garnet and his men were collected, it was found that many of them had been very dangerously wounded by the gang. It must be confessed that on this occasion Deathwing had used all his generalship and courage. But nothing could withstand Wildfire, Ned Garnet, Bob Bertram, and the innkeeper. Of Tim it behoves us to speak a little. He got very roughly handled by his grim opponent, in the deep pit, but that was all. He extricated himself out of the hole. He then mounted a tree, and there perched, had an excellent view of the battle by the light of burning buildings. He would shout out occasionally, "That's it, Master Ned! Give it to Bob! Smash the rascals! My brave sailor boys! Hurrah for Lieutenant Garnet! Bravo, Wildfire Ned!" But Tim became so noisy during the combat that he attracted the attention of Deathwing. "Bring that fool down," said Deathwing to one of his men, as he rode past the spot. "Bring that noisy fool out of the tree, and pitch him into the burning tavern." "What a civil devil!" thought Master Tim, and clambered up the tree still higher. Deathwing's orders, however, were obeyed. A skeleton, with a long dagger between his teeth, clambered up the tree. With a thick bough, which Tim had torn from the tree, he took deliberate aim, and dealt his enemy a tremendous thwack on the skull, when halfway up the tree, and knocked him down again. This trick Master Tim had played several times with great success, but ere long 2 skeletons essayed to climb up after him. For a few moments they amused themselves with firing at Tim with their pistols. This was very pleasant sport for them, but quite the contrary to Tim, who jumped about as nimbly as a squirrel, and after many attempts successfully hid himself in the upper part of the trunk. "I'm safe now," thought he, but to his horror he heard his grim pursuers climbing up and probing the rotten trunk with their swords every yard as they ascended. One of their sword blades grazed Tim's shin, and he quickly fell from his perch right to the bottom of the trunk, and some 3 feet below the surface of the earth. For be it remarked, the tree was an immense old cypress, which in all cases have hollow trunks. The 2 skeletons searched and searched in vain. They cut and hacked the soft bark, and wherever they found a knot-hole, plunged their long sword blades into it, in hopes of transfixing the unlucky and timorous groom. But with a long-drawn sigh, Tim thanked his stars that he was now safe, and, as he turned his eyes upwards, he plainly saw the 2 skeletons looking down upon him. But they did not perceive him. They gave up the search, thinking that their intended victim had escaped by crawling out onto a large branch, and then dropping to the ground among the combatants on every side. They left the tree, and Tim, all alone in his momentary glory, had serious misgivings as to how he should escape. He could not get up again, for his own weight in his descent had forced him down, with a little squeezing, but it could not force him up again. "I'm doomed," groaned Tim, in his dismal incarceration, "and shall be stifled, or die of hunger here." His position, it must be confessed, was an unenviable one. "I'm in a living tomb," he groaned, and as the rats, mice, insects, and other creeping things now began to nibble him in every part of the body, and with great industry, he shouted out with horror and positive pain. Crouched up as he was, and sitting almost like a tailor upon his curled-up legs, he had no power to move. Wherever he thrust forth his hand it came in contact with some slimy, creeping thing, which made the blood curdle in his veins. To add to his misery, he now heard the voices of Wildfire Ned, Bob Bertram and Lieutenant Garnet shouting to their followers in tones of triumph. Next followed a rousing cheer from the lusty sailors as they left the spot in pursuit of their grim and stubborn enemies. Tim shouted again and again with his utmost power. But his voice died away, and was not heard in the noise and confusion which reigned on every side. "I'm lost! I'm lost!" he cried, and gave way to despair. All was now quiet around the old cypress tree. Save the crackling of the burning dwellings and the sharp cries of many who were wounded, poor Tim heard nothing. He resigned himself meekly and humbly to die. "If I had only acted bravely," he thought, "this misfortune wouldn't have happened to me. But how could I help it? Wildfire Ned is a perfect devil, and don't care any more for a sword cut than I would for a flea bite. This all comes of being a coward," he groaned. "Curse the skeleton rascals! And this tree which offered me protection! If I could only get out of this stifling hole I'd give—" "What? What would you give?" asked a solemn voice near to him. Tim began to shiver in every limb. "Was that a voice I heard?" he sighed. "No, it cannot be. It must have been all reality," interrupted the voice. For a moment the frightened prisoner dared not move. "'Tis the devil," he muttered. Before he could utter another word Tim felt the earth moving from under him. With a groan he endeavored to cling to the inside of the tree. The effort was vain. When least expected he felt himself gradually going. At last he suddenly fell into a cave some 20 feet below. Chapter 14. The bridal ball, unexpected visitors, the dread alarm, the muffled peal of bells. Wildfire Ned, Bob Bertram, Lieutenant Garnet, and the brave old innkeeper followed the skeleton band as far as they possibly could, but, as we have said, soon lost sight of their grim and bloodthirsty enemies. The sailors, meanwhile, acting under Garnet's orders, now returned to the burning tavern and exerted themselves with great courage and labor to extinguish the flames. This they succeeded in doing to some great extent, and soon were joined by crowds from the village of Darlington, who had been attracted to the spot by the lurid glare in the sky. The spirit room of the tavern was saved, and all it contained, but little else. Old Nettles, the landlord, for such was his right name, was too much overjoyed at vanquishing the skeleton crew to think much of his loss, particularly as Lieutenant Garnet had informed him that he would be recompensed by the king himself for all he had lost, and much more given to him besides, for so bravely fighting in the cause of law and order against Deathwing's friends. Full of joy, and not caring a button for his wounds, he helped to gather up all the stock which had been saved, and amid loud applause, distributed alesh, wines, and spirits in abundance to all comers. The sailors were in their glory, and drank health and long life to Nettles, landlord of the Grapes, in many a flowing tankard, and many a brimming glass sparkling with good old Jamaica rum, as they merrily squatted on the green grass smoking their pipes. Among others who had hurried to the scene of conflict, with his servants well armed, but who by accident arrived too late, was young Lord Walton, from the Abbey, some 5 miles away. The old Marquis, his father, had a large party of lords and ladies assembled at the Abbey that night to celebrate the marriage of his only daughter, Lady Julia. Lord Walton, the son, however, did not remain a moment in the ballroom when it was whispered to him that the skeleton crew were abroad. Unknown to anyone, he gathered together a band of trusty servants, and hurried forth to lend his aid. But if he arrived too late, he greatly admired the courage and daring of those who had so long contended with the crew, and in token of his admiration invited Lieutenant Garnet, Wildfire Ned, and Bob Bertram to pass the rest of the night at the Abbey, and partake of the hospitality there, and join in the merry marriage dance. This just suited the 3 heroes, and with little pressing they accepted the invitation, particularly as this was the last night which Wildfire Ned intended to pass on shore. He was to join Lieutenant Garnet's ship on the morrow, for on the spot the brave sailor offered Ned a commission as midshipman, which he readily accepted. Away then they sped across the country and soon reached Walton Abbey, when the soft crash of music, and the gliding of graceful figures past the many windows, proclaimed that the marriage festivity was at its height. When the truth was told about Wildfire, Ned and the others, and of their gallantry in dispersing the skeleton crew, every one was amazed, and fair dames smiled on Ned as he gaily whirled in the dreamy mazes of the dance. But soon a change came o'er the festive scene. The bells of the village church, with muffled peals, suddenly broke forth upon the night with a discordant funereal clang. The dance was stopped. All looked amazed. Young Lord Walton entreated all to be calm, and meanwhile with an old and trusty servant went to the entrance hall to ascertain the cause of a sudden noise heard there. The doors were flung open. There stood before him a grim sight. Deathwing, among his mounted band, with torch and link in hand, all in a blaze of lurid light, in a hoarse voice, demanded admittance to the ball. For a moment the young lord remained motionless. He could scarcely believe the evidence of his own eyesight. He had often heard of the skeleton crew before, but had never seen anything of them. Until that night he looked upon that band as a myth, believed in only by the dull and ignorant rustics around him. Had not the story come from the lips of young Warbeck and Lieutenant Garnet, who had more than once encountered those grim creatures, he would have still believed that they were all imaginary creatures. But here was proof positive of their existence. The hair of the old servant who accompanied the young lord to the hall door stood up with fright as he looked out upon the ghastly gang before him, and his knees began to tremble. "Who and what are ye?" asked the young lord, in firm and determined tones. "Deathwing and his crew," was the hoarse response. "What want ye here, at this hour of the night?" "Open wide the door," said a chorus of skeletons. "Stand back," said young Walton, as he drew his sword and flourished it. "The first of ye that stirs shall perish." A coarse laugh was the only response. In a second Deathwing, with a heavy blow, knocked young Walton senseless to the floor. The old butler fell flat upon his face with horror in the entrance hall. Before they entered the skeleton crew threw their torches in a heap upon the ground, and walked boldly into the hall. Some few of them remained behind to mind the horses. All was now darkness. On the first landing Deathwing halted, and directed his men to enter the rooms to the right and left. One of these rooms was at that moment being prepared for the bridal supper, and many servants were engaged in laying out the tables with costly plate. 2 or 3 skeletons entered. The servants gave a loud shout of terror, and vanished through an opposite door. They made their way at a terrific pace towards the ballroom. "What means all this commotion?" said the Marquis. "Where is my son?" demanded the Marchioness. "My brother, has aught happened to him?" said the trembling bride. Before any explanation could be given one of the doors opened, and in rushed several of the skeleton crew. On the instant they were confronted by Wildfire, Ned, Lieutenant Garnet, and Bob, and most of the gentlemen present, who whipped out their swords, and darted at the grim intruders. Some of the ladies fainted. 1 or 2 old gentlemen jumped on the windowsills out of danger. Others tried to escape. But as they rushed in one direction out of harm's way, other doors opened and different parties of the skeleton crew came into view. All was a scene of terror and confusion. It seemed to the affrighted assembly as if the dead had risen from their graves. The combat was fierce and fiery. The bridegroom was one of the first to fall in the melee. Lady Julia ran forward to assist him. On the instant, however, and unperceived by the many, Deathwing advanced with hasty strides, seized the bride, and carried her from the room. This was the sole object of Deathwing in making his visit. When it was accomplished he darted downstairs, with the fair one fainting in his arms, and mounted his horse. A shrill cry he gave, which was recognized by all his followers, as he mounted his strong horse, and galloped away. His band understood the maneuver, and as quickly as they could, fought their way towards the entrance hall, leaped upon their horses, and flew away like the wind, with wild shouts of triumph. "Pursue! Pursue!" shouted Ned, fierce with anger. His advice was followed on the instant. Horses were called for, but the terrified servants were loath to come forth from their hiding places to answer the summons. They had madly rushed to all manner of places for concealment. Some had made their way to the top of the mansion, and there concealed themselves behind chimney pots, and even in the deep rain gutters. One or two had actually climbed up chimneys, and were almost smothered in soot. "Anywhere! Anywhere!" was the cry among them. Somewhere or anywhere to hide, so as to be out of sight and reach of Deathwing's awful band. More than one had locked themselves into pantries, among the plates, dishes, and so forth, and great was the crash of valuable earthenware. No one among the whole household seemed to care what they did or what they broke, so that they could get out of the way. A fat footman who had rushed to the coal cupboard found it occupied by another corpulent servant, who had managed to squeeze himself in there. Dirty as he was, he darted into the beautiful bridal chamber, turned down the bedclothes, and tumbled in boots and all. With this state of confusion reigning, therefore, it was impossible for Wildfire, Ned, Garnet, or any one else, to get their horses quick enough to pursue the villains with any chance of success. Bob Bertram was foremost at the stables. There were more than 20 horses there, besides his own, and those of his friends. He ran hither and thither, busy with hands and voice, and ere long a party of gentlemen started in hot pursuit, led on by Wildfire Ned, who, with loud shouts, dashed spurs into starlight, and was foremost of them all. Chapter 15. In which some of the villagers are made sandwiches of. The village of Walton, near to the Abbey, never forgot that memorable night on which Lady Julia, a newly made bride, was carried off by the chief of the skeleton crew, and her young husband cruelly killed. It was an event which shocked the most hardened. During the day, the whole village and its surroundings had been making holiday in honor of Lady Julia's nuptials, and everything had passed off with the greatest satisfaction to everyone. But few persons were astir, and these consisted of the village clerk, the butcher, the druggist, the postmaster, and a few other notabilities, who were warming their legs round the tavern fire, and indulging in all manner of stories, both wild and strange, until long after the church clock had struck the hour of 12. The parson's clerk was just in the middle of a ghost story. His hearers, with open mouths and staring eyes, listened in rapt attention. The wind sighed down the chimney most dolefully, and the clerk began to look very nervous and shaky. He had just got to that part of his tale where the ghost appears upon the scene, when the village bells in a discordant peal clanged out upon the silent night. Every one in the parlor of the Black Bull was startled. For a moment they looked at each other, and then towards the door, as if expecting that the ghost so often mentioned in the story would really step in among them. They listened again and breathed very hard. Still they heard the dismal clanging of the village bells. "Who is that? What can that mean? How comes this?" said one and all. "Don't you hear it?" "Why, in course we do. What can it mean?" "Oh, it's some o' the drunken ringers as have got into the steeple, and want to frighten us," said the courageous butcher. "Then let us go and stop 'em," said the clerk. "Who'll go? Why, me." "I will." "And so will I," several replied at once. They left the cozy parlor, and lanterns in hand, proceeded through the village, armed with thick, stout cudgels, bent on giving the drunken bell-ringers a sound thrashing for thus disturbing the silence of the night. It would have been bad enough, the worthies thought, if the ringers had pealed out merrily, but instead of that, as we have said, it was a muffled funeral peal which issued from the old tower. Besides the clerk and his friends, there were numerous others, who left their warm beds intent upon finding out the cause of all this strange and startling disturbance. Straightway this valiant band of villagers proceeded towards the church, and could plainly see lights in the belfry, and the reflection of persons against the windows and through the lattice-work. Mr. Clerk led the way up the narrow winding stairs of stone, and if it must be confessed, swearing the while most lustily against the impudent varlets, who thus disturbed the peace. He had not gone far up the stairs when the ringing ceased. All lights were suddenly extinguished in the belfry. This was a good sign, the clerk thought, and grasped his thick stick with vigor. With a loud shout, he and the others rushed into the ringer's room, lanterns in hand. At that moment the bells, this time unmuffled, gave out a most horrible, clanging sound. The clerk started back in fright towards the door, and hastily turned on his light. He and the rest groaned most dolefully, for there, standing before them, were 8 skeletons, each with a rope in his hand, and while pulling away most vigorously, grinned most diabolically at the intruders. The clerk and his friends would have given all the money in Walton to have been a mile or more away. But there they were, unable to stir, wriggling and writhing, and knowing not which way to retreat, or what to do. "Oh, mercy on us," said the clerk, almost distilled to a jelly. "Why, it's some of the skeleton crew. They have changed from a funeral to a joy peal." "What can all this horrid thing mean?" said another. "Mean? Ha! Ha!" gruffly laughed one of the skeletons, in a voice that made the entrapped villagers quake again. "Mean, eh? Why, it means that we are so glad to see you, that's all. We wanted some amusement. What can these monsters mean or intend to do?" sighed the clerk, who much wished to get away if he could. "Mean? Intend?" repeated the horrible voice again. "Why, it means that we intend to celebrate Lady Julia's marriage with our great chief, Deathwing, and will do honor to the event by hanging every mother's son of you." Dismal groans were now heard on all sides. Some began to gasp from fear. Others fell to praying. But the skeleton bell-ringers were as good as their word, as we shall see. They stopped pealing the bells, and glared most hideously at their intended victims. "So you came here with stout cudgels in your hands, did you, and intended to give us all a good sound thrashing, I dare say? Not me. Nor me. I hadn't the remotest idea of any such thing, most august and ghostly strangers," chimed in the terrified clerk, as his legs almost gave way from under him. "As we know you are lying, parson's man as you are, why, you might as well come forward first. We intend to make an example of—" The poor clerk was dragged out from among his fellows. Two of the skeletons pulled down the heaviest bell, and much of its slack rope was coiled on the floor. They held it down. "That bell is too heavy to swing up one," said the chief. "Take the apothecary, and make a sandwich of him and the lying clerk." Much to the astonishment of all present, the clerk and the apothecary were placed back to back. The slack rope of the great bell was twisted and tied round their bodies, and fastened into a knot. At a given signal the two skeletons who held down the great bell let go the rope. Up went the two unfortunate devils, shouting at the top of their voices, and dangling in midair, like a couple of spiders on a single thread of web. In like manner all the rest were sandwiched, as it was called. Each rope was wound round the bodies of two at least. And there they hung, to the infinite amusement of their tormentors, writhing and groaning, their own weight drawing down the bells from time to time, and making the most horrible and discordant noises. Satisfied with this pleasant handiwork, the skeleton bell-ringers left the belfry, and the worthy villagers, fighting like cats tied on a clothesline, pulling each other about, and dancing a most painful hornpipe between the ceiling and floor to the inharmonious jangling of the bells, were left all alone in their glory. Chapter 16. Philip Redgill is found to be not so clever as he considered himself. Philip Redgill next appears on the scene of our story in his father's offices. His father was very rich, and had extensive dealings with ships and valuable merchandise in the city of London. He was a widower of nearly 60 summers, and had no child but Philip. This youth had been well educated, and was allowed an ample income to live on. But he looked upon commerce as something degrading, and felt ashamed to own among the gay gallants of the town that he was anything less than a person of noble blood. His propensities for gambling had well nigh ruined his father more than once. But the fond old parent had overlooked his son's misdemeanors very frequently. At last it was discovered that Philip had so far forgotten himself as to forge his father's name to certain heavy bills, and squandered the money on gay persons of the town. From that time forth a great coldness existed between father and son, and Philip was told for the last time that he must make his annual allowance suffice for his pleasures, and that should he again so disgrace the time-honored name of Redgill, he would take the consequences, for the law should be enforced, which in those days was death for forgery. Philip, however, had become so accustomed to high life about town, that he looked upon his father's conduct as something very cruel, and resolved to rob him all he could rather than be lowered in the estimation of his lordly acquaintances. A libertine soon brings many a good and rich parent to ruin. But old Redgill was a man of firm purpose, when he once had made up his mind to anything, and although he did not tell any one of his intentions, he frequently informed Philip privately that his conduct was bringing sorrows and misery on his old age, and that if he did not reform he would disinherit him. All this Philip Redgill looked upon as a good joke, and set his wits to work to get money as best he could by hook or by crook, so as to still keep up the reputation he had already gained among the gayest of the gay, as reckless Redgill. One of the first things which Philip did when he found it no longer possible to screw money out of his rich old parent was to form the acquaintance of the notorious Deathwing, chief of the skeleton crew. Old Redgill had 2 ships on their way from the Indies, laden with gold, spices, and silks. In consideration of receiving half of the cargo, Deathwing and his infamous crew resolved to waylay these 2 ships and attack them when about 50 miles from the land's end. This was done. The crew of both ships were murdered in cold blood. The vessels were run into a snug inlet on the west coast of England, near to where Deathwing's caves and storehouses were situated. Philip received but 1/5 of the spoil, instead of 1/2. But he was much too wise to say anything about his disappointment and annoyance. This system of villainy was repeated more than once, but as his father's ships did not arrive in port except at intervals of many months, Philip often found his money running short, and without any visible means of replenishing his exhausted purse. In his father's offices he had often heard of old Farmer Bertram's indebtedness, and of how much money was still due on the mortgages at 4 Ash Farm. Mr. Harry Bolton, he also knew, was his father's traveling collector, and was about to start on his usual journey. As we have seen, Philip forestalled Bolton's visit to 4 Ash Farm, and by impersonating Bolton, obtained an interview with old Bertram and murdered him. Young Redgill was a cool-handed villain, and knew not what remorse was. Bloodshed to him was quite a usual thing. He was not a brave young man by any means, as Wildfire Ned often proved. But it was whispered by those who knew him best that when returning from wine parties he would have no scruple in picking a quarrel with any inoffensive citizen he might fall across, and feel no regret at drawing his sword and wounding any one who was unarmed. Many a simple shopkeeper and unsuspecting night watchman had been pinked by reckless Redgill, and no one was any the wiser. But, like all great rogues and rascals, Philip was very careful indeed, in picking quarrels, or drawing his toasting fork upon any one who was at all likely or able to resent it blow for blow. He had up to the present time run along in his career of crime undetected and unsuspected. But all things have an end. And so it was with Philip. From petty thefts in his father's offices he gradually and swiftly descended to greater villainies, until at last, as we have seen, even coolly planned murder did not shock or retard him in his life of crime. Like an apple, he was only getting sufficiently ripe to fall into the hands of justice, and, as will be seen in due course of time, he met with his proper deserts. Weak and pale, Philip sat in his father's counting-house, in which were busily engaged dozens of industrious clerks. He had sauntered through the offices with a supercilious air, and to those who politely bade him good morrow, he only returned a contemptuous look, as if they were so much dirt, and beneath his notice. As usual, he was elegantly dressed, and a servant assisted him into his father's private office, where he lounged in a capacious chair, and toyed with a pet spaniel. Old Redgill had been informed of his son's wound, but up to the present time knew nothing as to what had occasioned it, for Philip did not, in truth, in his own words, he would not condescend to live in his father's house, but kept up a small but elegant establishment of his own, where wine parties, card-playing, and magnificent suppers were the order of the night. After a time old Redgill, the famous East India merchant, entered, and the father and son spoke of many things. "But you have never told me how you got that sword thrust, Philip," said the father, in a very anxious tone. "I suppose you and some gay spark fell out on the road and had a pass or two at some roadside inn. I know your proud spirit, my son, and your headstrong valor." Philip smiled faintly in a patronizing way, as if a pass or two with gay sparks was an everyday occurrence, although his own heart told him that he was one of the greatest cowards and villains unhung. "No, sir," was the calm reply. "The whole affair occurred in this manner. When I left Darlington Hall with old Sir Richard Warbeck, our carriage was attacked by a band of highwaymen." I see," said the fond father, in great glee. "And in beating them off you got wounded?" "Not that exactly. Let me tell the story. Old Sir Richard escaped through the assistance of some gallant gentleman unknown to him or myself, and he travelled on alone, for after fighting with the vagabonds, and after I had wounded several of them, they took me prisoner. Took you prisoner, eh? What a mercy you escaped at all! You surprise me. It will surprise you more to hear what I've got to tell. These ruffians conducted me to a roadside den, some house of call of theirs, and who should I discover but Ned Warbeck among them? Ned Warbeck? Impossible! No, it is a fact seeing him there, and knowing what a young rascal he is I accused him of having set on the villains to rob and murder his uncle so as to fall heir to part of the estate. Oh, the young scoundrel! And so you think he did so? Think, said Philip, with a curling lip. I am sure of it, for who but he could have known of his uncle's intended journey? I see, go on, this adventure is intensely exciting. And what happened? He knew that I was in the power of his friends, and the young villain became very defiant. He drew his sword, and would have rushed upon me unarmed as I was. Cowardly boy, said the father. But when least expected, I whipped a weapon out of the scabbard of one present, and went at him. Good! Excellent! What then? At the first thrust I disarmed him, and the young villain cried for mercy. I granted it, but when least expected, the whole gang dashed at me, furious at their young chief. Chief! You do not mean, then, that Ned Warbeck has joined a band of robbers, and been made their captain? I do, though, just as you say. They rushed at me with savage oaths. I retreated to the door, fighting as I went, and reached my horse. Just as I was about to escape, young Warbeck dashed out upon me, and gave me a sly thrust. Oh, the young imp of the devil! Groaned old Redgill. Just to think of his cunning and roguery, to leave his uncle's home to be captain of a band of highwaymen. Why, the young varlet will shortly grace a gibbet. Not a doubt of it, and I shall never rest content until I see it come to pass. While father and son were thus conversing, one of the clerks entered and announced the stranger. Who, and what kind of person is he? An officer of the crown, sir, a tall man with a black patch over his eye. An officer of the crown, thought Philip, and his face turned crimson. What can he want here? The old merchant asked. I know not, sir, but he is a swaggering kind of person, and is now walking up and down the stone passage entrance hall, clanking his sword in a very fierce and valiant manner. Did he give any name? Philip asked, in an uneasy manner. No, Mr. Philip. Admit him, said the old man, impatiently. What can any officer of the crown want with us, I wonder? I know not, his son answered. But as it may be a matter of secrecy, I will retire. Nay, do not, my son, stay with me. Philip, however, rose from his chair with difficulty, and proceeded towards the door. At that moment it was opened. Captain Jack stalked in. For a moment he was staggered at seeing Philip Redgill, and opened his eyes very wide. Philip put his finger to his lips slyly. Captain Jack coughed significantly, and said not a word. Philip now altered his mind, and sat in a chair. Your business, sir, said the old merchant, impatiently. My name first, and business afterwards is the style, I think, said Captain Jack, doffing his hat, and stroking his chin. Without invitation he squatted down in a chair, and stretched out his immense long legs to the utmost. Seeing a decanter of wine on the table, he helped himself to a large tumbler full, and tossed it off, saying, Ah! Who wouldn't be an East India merchant to have such sack as that? Ah! D&D fine stuff for a dusty day. Your name, sir? The old merchant inquired impatiently. My name? Eh? Ah! Just so, he replied indifferently, and with much composure pouring out another glass of wine. My name, sir, is Captain Jack, and yours is Mr. Redgill, I think. Here's health to you, old boy. And your business here? Said the merchant, amazed at the coolness of his vulgar visitor. My business? Eh? Well, if you want to know, I'm one of the most active, zealous, and valiant officers the crown can boast, and as to catching rogues, vagabonds, and cutthroats, there isn't my equal in all the kingdom. I've only got one fault, and that is, I love the bottle. All this has nothing to do with me, sir, said the old merchant, getting red in the face with anger. Your business here, I demand again? Don't get frothy, my old friend, said Captain Jack. I'm coming to that now. And what is it, pray? I'll just tell you, said Captain Jack. But as we don't want any intruders, I may as well lock the door. He rose and did so, and put the key in his pocket. Philip was now apprehensive of danger, and turned deadly pale. His father began to stutter out something, but could not speak plainly. I have come here on a very important bit of business, said Captain Jack, and like an honest man, as I am, don't want to hurt the tender feelings of anyone. I don't understand you, said the old merchant. Well, there has been murder committed, that's all, said Captain Jack, with a low chuckle. Murder! Gasped the old merchant, retreating a step or two in surprise and horror. Murder! Echoed Philip, with a well-feigned look of astonishment. Yes, murder, gentlemen, that's all. And what have I to do with such a foul charge? Asked the merchant, indignantly. You haven't, but there are certain parties not a very great way from here as have, said Captain Jack, very carelessly in the direction where Philip sat. Young Redgill felt the blood run coldly to his heart as he heard these words. But he spoke not. Someone in this house? Asked the merchant, astonished. Yes, in this very house, and no other. Not only murder, mind you, but robbery, said Captain Jack very coolly. And a pretty good haul the chap made of it, so I hear. He bagged lots of gold coin. Do you know old Bertram of Four Ash Farm? I do. He is my creditor to a large amount, and has to pay me heavy arrears on a mortgage I hold of him. I expect him in town every day. You may expect a long time, then, for he's the chap which was robbed and murdered. Impossible, said the old merchant, turning white. What a horrid affair! And have they found out who did it? Not exactly, said Captain Jack. But I think I can find out afore long, he answered, slowly and ominously. I'm coming to that point now. Have you a traveling collector in your house of the name of Bolton? Bolton? Yes. Of course you have, father, said Philip eagerly. Surely he couldn't have been such a wretch as to. Steady, my friend, steady, said Captain Jack coolly. Don't be in any flurry, either of ye, but answer me. Did he call at old Bertram's? Did you order him to call there, and collect your debt? Yes, you did, father. I heard you tell him to do so in my hearing, when last I saw you. I know I did, my son, but when you had gone I altered my mind, and sent Bolton in quite a different direction. He was not within 50 miles of Four Ash Farm, I'll swear, that is, unless he went there unknown to me, and contrary to my orders. A heavy sigh escaped from Philip's lips, and he felt a cold sweat upon his guilty brow, as he said, I know you told him, but if you countermanded the order, of course that's a different thing. It's an awful charge to be accused of his murder. Yes, ain't it? Said Captain Jack, with a wicked grin playing around his large mouth. And robbery, too. Have either of ye heard of it afore? Not a syllable? Never dreamed of such an abominable affair, said Philip. Lor! How strange! And just to think as how this job has been in my hands more than a fortnight, and all the country knows it. But is this Mr. Bolton in your offices now? He is. Then let us have a squint at him. Order him in here, for I've got an exact description of the party who called at the farmhouse. He was disguised. The door was unlocked, and in a few moments young Mr. Bolton appeared. As he crossed the threshold, with a light step and pleasant smile, he suddenly caught the serious gaze of his master and young Redgill. You sent for me, sir, he began, but turned all manner of colors when he confronted his old master's black looks. What is all this? He asked. I am sorry to say, Mr. Bolton, Philip Redgill began, that you are suspected of a most foul. Not so fast, said Captain Jack, interrupting. I understand my own business best, and want no assistance from anyone. Look you here, young man, he began, addressing Mr. Bolton. One of your master's customers and old friends have been murdered, and you are one of the suspected parties. I? Yes, you, and all I've got to say is that I have got a warrant for your apprehension as being concerned in it, and you must come with me. Arrested on the charge of murder? Bolton gasped, and he staggered towards the door, past Philip Redgill, whose countenance wore a malicious smile of triumph. The news stunned the young man, and he would have rushed away from the spot. At that moment, however, Mr. Faulkner and another unprepossessing, ugly-looking member of the baker's dozen appeared at the door, and politely collared the astonished youth. He was borne away to prison more dead than alive. But before Captain Jack left the private office he helped himself to another glass of wine, and, as he went out, whispered to Philip, "Can I see you some time tonight?" "Where?" answered Philip, in a faint voice. "At the Cat and Bagpipes over the water." "What time?" "At 12. I'll be there." "Mind you do," said Captain Jack, with an ominous wink, and stalked out of the office in a swaggering manner. "What did the officer say to you, Philip?" the anxious father asked. "He simply said that the case, as it at present stands, looks very awkward for Mr. Bolton." "Oh, is that all? Yet methinks he is an unmannerly officer. Did you notice how he winked and blinked at you while he spoke?" "No, did he?" "Yes, and had I not known you well, I should have supposed you knew and had dealings with him at some time." Philip attempted to smile, as he said, "Oh, that is nothing. Winking their eyes and stroking their noses is only a habit these officers have got. But," he sighed to himself, "I am in their clutches. But will soon rid myself of the bloodhounds. He must visit me tonight. I cannot if I would go there to his den of thieves. I know the place well, and would not trust myself among the ragamuffins who meet there, no, not for 1,000 pieces of gold. Curse the hour I ever met them. I am tracked and dogged. These fellows shall be removed from my path, they must be." Chapter 17. The Nubian Slave and Ellen Harmer. It must be confessed that no man living ever felt less remorse for crime of any kind than did Colonel Blood. He had been in several wars, and was a rough-handed, cold-hearted villain. But with all his knavery, he possessed a sort of gentlemanly bearing that admitted him into almost any society of the loose-living period in which he lived, namely, that of the lascivious Charles II, whom people are wont to call the Merry Monarch. John Blood had ridden some 20 miles or more. He hired a light and fast four-wheeled vehicle, in order to reach London all the sooner. Ellen Harmer, almost distracted at thus being forcibly borne away from her father's home, wept and bewailed her cruel fate. But had she shed tears of gore, they would have had no effect upon the mind or conscience of her rude, rough-handed captor. In order to quiet the beautiful Ellen, he administered to her a glass of wine, in which he had placed a noxious drug. This had the effect of producing sound sleep, nor was she aware of whither the fast-going vehicle was going. All she knew was, that when she awoke on the following morning, she found herself in a sumptuously decorated chamber. Around her were furniture and articles of beautiful design, and evidently of great price. She rushed out of bed towards the window in great surprise. It was barred. But she could see below her splendid gardens, with fountains playing. Fruit trees and flowers met her astonished gaze on every hand. All was silent. "Am I dreaming?" she thought. "Has all that I have passed through been naught but a cruel, excruciating nightmare?" Beside a splendid mirror, in which she could see herself from head to foot, she perceived a massive bell-pull, with fine bullion tassel. This she mechanically touched. A soft, sweet sound responded to her touch, like the harmonious tinkling of a silver bell. The more she looked about her, the more she was astonished and confounded at the brilliance, beauty, and elegance of all things. She heard no one approach, but turning suddenly beheld a tall servant, splendidly attired, but his face and bare arms were as black as ebony. Ellen started. The servant bowed lowly and smiled. "Where am I?" the startled girl inquired, with a flushed face and flashing eyes. "Who has brought me hither, and for what?" The tall Nubian smiled again. He bowed more lowly than ever, but spoke not. He motioned to her that he was both deaf and dumb. "Set me at liberty!" gasped the captive girl, for the first time realizing her true position. "Set me free! I cannot breathe the atmosphere of this gilded prison. Oh! Let me once more flee to my poor old father, or my heart will break!" So speaking, she sank on her knees before the tall Nubian, and burst into tears. For a moment the black gazed at the beautiful young creature, and his eyes rolled in wild delight. He lifted her up from her prostrate position on the floor, and kissed her snowy hand with every token of affection. This act surprised and startled Ellen more than ever, for the strange intruder was a fierce, tall man, and one who seemed to possess, when he willed it, both the strength of a lion or the gentleness of a lamb. But with all his ferocious exterior there was a something in his smile both tender and reassuring. He placed a finger on his lips, and led her gently towards the window. He next, and with great air of mystery and caution, pulled out of his silk doublet a small ivory tablet. He partly wrote upon it these words: "You are a stranger to me, and rough as I look, I love you dearly." Ellen's eyes darted fiery anger at him as she shunned the smiling black. He took no notice of her seeming repugnance, but smiled, and in the act showed his rows of shining teeth. He rubbed out the words he had written, and quickly penciled these others. "Do you wish me to be a friend or foe, fair one?" "A friend," said Ellen, trembling. He placed before her the tablet again, and she read: "I will be a friend to you, and a true one, on a single condition." The girl's blood almost curdled in her veins as she read what he had hastily scribbled, for she now trembled for her honor and chastity. "Name your condition," she gasped. Will you keep a secret?" he wrote. "I will," she answered. "On your life and honor?" he wrote again. "Yes, on my life and honor," she answered firmly, for a moment feeling reassured by his change of manner. He now wrote on the tablet: "I am the slave of Colonel Blood. They call me Sinbad, and am supposed even by my master to be both deaf and dumb, but I am not." "Not deaf and dumb?" she answered. "Then you knew the sounds of the bell I rang?" "I heard it," he whispered. "And knew its meaning." "My meaning?" she asked. "Yes, and my master's also, for he left word with his confidential valet that directly you rang he should be summoned." "For what purpose?" "That I will afterwards explain. I knew that you had been abducted, and that when you had fully recovered from the drugs administered to you last night on the way hither you would ring the chamber bell." "This bell I watched," said the Nubian, "and muffled it in order that I might know when you had awoke from slumber, and forewarn you of all that is to happen to you this day." "Happen?" said Ellen. "Yes, maiden. Look not surprised, you are not the first fair victim who has fallen into the treacherous fangs of my master, Colonel Blood. For what purpose, then, was I brought hither? I have never harmed anyone. What crime am I guilty of?" "Your beauty is your only crime," the Nubian whispered. "He has brought you hither as a fair one who may be dishonored, and thereafter, for a time pander to the lusts of the king, his master." "Impossible!" Ellen gasped. "Nay, 'tis true, but remember, I have forewarned you, and if you do but keep your promise I will be your friend. In helping you I seek my own revenge. I cannot tell you the horrid indignity which I have suffered at my master's hands, but you may perhaps at some time learn it. In case you should need it, take this dagger, conceal it in your fair bosom. But hark! I hear someone approaching." As quick as thought the Nubian crawled beneath the bed and listened. 'Twas Colonel Blood who stood at the door. Chapter 18. In which Captain Jack makes an unexpected call at midnight. Philip Redgill was by far too weak from his recent wound to keep his appointment with Captain Jack at the Cat and Bagpipes over the water, and therefore remained at home in his own snug apartments, surrounded as he was by every luxury and convenience. Richly attired gentlemen of gallant appearance called during the day to inquire after his health and condition. At night also many of them dropped in to have a chat, and crack a bottle of wine with the invalid. Masked balls, marriages, elopements, and the latest court scandal were the topics of conversation with Redgill and his friends. The rattle of the dice-box, and shuffling of cards were the order of the evening among these gay revellers. Gayest of the gay, and loudest among them all, was Philip Redgill, who, propped up with pillows on a luxurious sofa, joined the gamblers, and puffed a cigar with as much coolness as if nothing were the matter with him. The hours flew by, and Philip neglected his appointment with Captain Jack. When he occasionally thought of his promise, he only smiled as he reflected. "That long-legged devil recognized me. Well, chance makes us acquainted with queer people sometimes. That comes of getting into scrapes upon the road. I suppose he wants to borrow some money of me, that's all. Well, he's an ugly-looking rascal, though, and I like not his looks. I'll give that worthy a call tomorrow. I can't meet him tonight. If I were to take a sedan chair all that distance, it would reopen this cursed wound that Wildfire Ned gave me. D.M. him. During the night, other arrivals were announced, both lords and ladies of doubtful standing in society, brilliant in silks and paint. Music, light laughter, jokes, wit, and repartee echoed through Philip's pleasant suite of rooms. Languishing smiles, whispered words, eloquent winks, nods, and pressure of the hand passed and repassed from one to another. Some sang, others danced. Here was a boisterous wine party, and there a gossiping set. The hours flew by, nor did any one give heed to thought or care. Midnight chimed from the church towers. The half-hour told. But the merrymakers took no notice of the flight of time. 1 o'clock struck. A loud knock was heard at the door. A servant opened it. Captain Jack stood there, accompanied by several friends. They were comparatively well-dressed, but slightly the worse for liquor. "Who are you, gentlemen?" the servant asked. "We are," Captain Jack began. "No, we ain't," replied Faulkner. "Yes, we are," said the captain, hiccuping. "What, sirs?" asked the servant again. "Why, gentlemen, to be sure," said Captain Jack, leaning against the doorpost. "I perceive that," the servant replied. "But I fear me, sirs, you are somewhat the worse for liquor, and have missed your way, and called at the wrong mansion." "No, damn me, if I have," said Captain Jack. "How dare you say that I am the worse for liquor, knave?" "I had better shut the door, gentlemen," the servant said. "And if you do, I'll brain you," said Faulkner with an oath. "Go and inform your master that I am here," said Captain Jack. "If he can't keep his appointment, why then, I'll keep mine, for I have made up my mind long ago to visit him." "Yes, and tell him that we are here," said Faulkner, "and desire to see him." "Who shall I say, sir?" the puzzled servant answered. "Oh, say anything. Tell him that my Lord Smash and friends have called," said Captain Jack, laughing. "That's as good a name as any." "Just so," another replied. "Do you hear, varlet? Announce Lord Smash and friends immediately." Before the astonished servant could recover his breath, Captain Jack and party pushed their way into the hall, and almost terrified out of his life, he bawled out, the parlor door in hand, "Ladies and gentlemen, Lord Smash and friends." Chapter 19. Master Tim gets into the hands of smugglers. The position of poor Tim, it must be confessed, was anything but pleasant. He had fallen into the depths below, but how, he could not tell. All he recollected, when he recovered consciousness, was, that he had fallen into a miserably dark and loathsome place, and not knowing how or which way to move. "Oh, Lord!" he sighed. "Here's a fix to be in. I'd give 1,000 gold pieces if I were only out of it." "Would you?" said a distant voice. "Ha! Ha! But then, you see, you ain't going to get out of it, my lad." "Who are you?" said Tim, trying to pluck up all the courage he possibly could. "Don't you know I've got a dagger left?" "Yes, I dare say you have," the voice replied. "But if you had a dozen daggers, or a whole arsenal at your back, they would do you no good here." At the same moment Tim felt a heavy hand laid upon his shoulder, and his limbs began to tremble. "What's your name, you shivering hound?" said the gruff voice, with a chuckle. "Tim, sir, if you please." "Tim what?" "Tim anything, Tim nothing. I never had but one name, 'tis only rich folks as can afford to have two." "Come, come, no larking with me," said the gruff voice. "Speak honestly, or I'll brain you." "You're very kind and obliging, I dare say," said Tim, with chattering jaws. "But, upon my word, I have only one name, and that is Tim." "You're much different, then, to a young chap as we lately collared, and is now in our custody, for he boasts of 4 names. "You don't say so?" "But I do, though. You shall make his acquaintance shortly. You'll make excellent comrades. Our hanging days are only once a month now, so you may as well make up your mind to swing when he does." "Thank ye," said Tim, gloomily. "You are very kind indeed. But if it's all the same to you, sir, whoever are you? I'd rather be swung up the next month after him with the 4 names." The unknown laughed gruffly until he made the cavern echo again with his boisterous merriment. "When were you born?" he asked. "I wasn't born at all," said Tim innocently. "Not born at all? Why, the rascal is making fun of me." "'Pon my word I ain't," said Tim. "I wasn't born at all, leastways, not as I knows on, for old Sir Richard Warbeck found me in his stables one morning bright and early, and in them there stables I've been all my life since." "Sir Richard Warbeck, eh?" "Yes." "Do you know him?" "I should think I do," said the unknown. "And a nice old fellow he is, too. He has 2 adopted nephews, hasn't he?" "Yes, young Wildfire Ned, and Charlie Warbeck, who's in the East India House in London." "Just so. And what brought you up that cypress tree?" "Why, you see, Master Ned and I attacked the skeleton crew, and, as they were too many for us, I hooked it up the tree out of the way, and fell through the hollow trunk, and—" "Found yourself here, eh?" "Just so. But who told you there was any secret way into this cavern through that tree?" "No one." "You lie, knave!" "On my word, no living soul told me." "Not old Nettles, the landlord of the public house?" "No, he never breathed a word, but fought with the skeleton crew like a warrior." "That's just what you should have done, and then I wouldn't have made up my mind to hang you, as I may do yet." "Are you sure that old Nettles never said a word?" "I'm positive, and will swear it." "'Tis well, for if he had done so I should be under the necessity of cutting his throat tonight so as to stop his mouth." "What a bloodthirsty villain!" thought Tim. "As you will, perhaps, be a dead man shortly, and as dead men don't tell any tales, I don't mind letting you know a thing or two as to who and what old Nettles is." "What is he?" "Why, a tavern keeper, and something more at times," said the unknown. "You have taken notice, of course, what a fine stock of wines, spirits, tobacco, and other things he has?" "Yes," said Tim. "It has been the talk of the whole country wide, as long as I can remember." "Quite true, but he owes all his prosperity to me, young man," said the gruff voice. "I could have blown him and his house up into the air many a time if I had thought proper. If he had divulged anything about our secret I would do so even now." Tim groaned. "This place where you are now in is a cave," said the voice. "A smuggler's cave, mind you." "Oh, lors! And I am chief of the gang. From this spot there is a long, dry passage, which runs out into the beach at low tide." "Is the mouth of the cavern filled with water, then, at high tide?" "Yes, nearly so, but there is sufficient room for an 8-oared boat to float in if the rowers duck their heads." "How jolly convenient," said Tim, who now began to like the chattiness of his unknown captor. "At night time we go out of the cavern in our long boats, and meet ships which are creeping close to shore. Sometimes they are friends who come from France or Spain with smuggled goods, and sometimes they are strange craft. If they be friends we unload the vessel, and run up our boats into the cave again, then the vessel stands off shore until the next night, and so on until we have emptied her. But if she is not a friendly craft we act according to circumstances. Sometimes we seize her goods, if we are very short, and the articles are of any value, they can never find us out." "But did you never fall across any of the king's cruisers?" said Tim. "Yes, many a time, but Lord bless your simple heart, we don't mind them, you know." "Don't you, though?" "No, not in the least." "But they carry long guns, and might." "Exactly, but that ain't nothing when you are used to it." "No, I suppose not," said Tim, with a sigh. "A 10-pound cannon shot playing 9 pins with your legs ain't nothing when you get used to it, but getting used to it is the thing," said Tim, very slowly and solemnly. "But I shouldn't, never." "Yes, you would." "No, I shouldn't." "Lor, man! A broken arm, or a leg or two knocked off, don't make much difference to any of our gang. Nor a broken head either, I should think," Tim said to himself, doubtingly. "We've got a famous cook, a bit of a tailor, a good doctor, a gunsmith, and other chaps in our band, so we manage to make a pleasant life of it." "I shouldn't like it." "Why not?" "Because you might fall foul of such a man as Lieutenant Garnet and his crew some day, and if you did—" "And if we did, what then?" "We should have to fight hard, that's all." "That's all, eh?" thought Tim. "But that's a little more than I should care about. Why, a fight once in a while is the life and soul of a bold smuggler. You have no notion how it gives one an appetite. I should think that a 10-pound cannon shot in one's stomach would be a trifle more that even a smuggler could digest," said Tim. "But, as you very wisely remarked once before, there's no telling when one gets used to it." "Just so, my brave lad. said the smuggler chief, laughing. "I like to hear you talk in that light-hearted way, for it convinces me that, after all, you've got some good stuff in you, and that your heart is of old British oak. Our boats are going out tonight. We expect a schooner off the shore from France about midnight, just after the moon sets. I'll take you with me, and to try you, unless you wish to be hung as a useless knave among us, I'll give you the honor of mounting the stranger's decks first." "First?" gasped Tim. "The first man to board the stranger's decks? Why, she might be a revenue cruiser or a well-armed stranger. That's what she really is, a well-armed stranger, nothing else. She must come within gunshot of us, for she's obliged to round the headland in order to get into port." "In that case, sir," said Tim, "if it's all the same to you, I wouldn't dare to have the impudence to take the place of honor, and be first to scale the stranger's sides. It's too much honor to confer on such a poor good-for-nothing as I am. I would much prefer to be last, if anything." The smuggler chief laughed out loudly, saying, "You're a droll devil, Tim, and no fool, I can very well see. But come this way, I will introduce you to my comrades." So speaking, he tumbled overhead, and fastened the trap through which Tim had fallen into the cave. "See, Tim," said the smuggler chief, as he entered a second cave in which dimly burned a horn lantern. "Do you see this?" he said, pointing to a trapdoor in the ceiling. "Yes, I do," said Tim, scrutinizing for the first time his tall, gaunt, rough-handed companion, and not much liking the looks of his black eyes, shaggy hair and beard, clothed, as he was, in red flannel and an immense pair of water boots that reached above the knees, at the same time not forgetting to cast his eyes on 2 pistols and a cutlass that hung in his broad black belt. "Well," said the chief, "that trapdoor leads into the old tavern. Nettle sells all our goods for us, and a pretty penny he gets by it. He's very rich, but a good-hearted old cock as ever lived. He's got a very pretty daughter, too, they call Katy, and if you join us, and prove yourself a brave fellow, as I know you are, why I'll introduce you, and when you're tired of smuggling, you can settle down, like many an old sinner does after he's made heaps of money, and lead a quiet, respectable life." "You're very kind," said Tim, with his head bewildered with all the chieftain said. From one cavern they passed to another, some of which were artfully ventilated and lighted by holes in the rocks overhead. At last they reached a very large apartment, which had been formed ages ago by the action of the sea, and cut just as cleverly as if done with a chisel. Round a long table sat smoking and drinking 20 or more rough, hardy-looking fellows, who were card-playing, throwing dice, sleeping, snoring, and the like. All of them hastily rose as the chief entered, and Tim was introduced to the company in words which conveyed the idea that the stranger would become a valuable member of the band. Smoking and drinking continued, and soon Master Tim found himself the center of attraction, and as he was, of course, expected to be a very brave fellow, he favored the company with a long string of lies, in which he narrated his several encounters with the skeleton crew, and against whom he had displayed prodigies of valor. The chief, however, left the company, and wended his way through the dark caverns towards his own particular abode. He found standing at his door a special messenger. "That you, Dolphin?" said the chief. "So soon returned?" "Yes, worthy Sea Hawk," was the reply. "And I bring most important news." "From whom?" "The skeleton crew and Wildfire Ned. It needs instant attention." "It shall be attended to at once. Come this way." The smuggler chief and his trusty messenger entered the apartment together. Chapter 20. Captain Jack plays a trump card, the gay company surprised. As we have narrated in a previous chapter, Captain Jack and his friends insisted upon thrusting themselves uninvited upon the gay and fashionable company assembled in Philip Redgill's elegantly furnished suite of rooms. "Lord Smash and friends," said the astonished domestic, announcing the stranger in a loud voice. "Lord who?" said Philip, in astonishment, as he turned his eyes, and beheld Captain Jack before him. For a moment he knew not what to do or say. The thought struck him that they had actually found out all about old Bertram's murder, and were come to arrest him. Cold sweat poured from his brow. His heart felt chilly, and his sight grew dim. But when Captain Jack, with a broad smile on his ugly face, shook Philip by the hand, and said, "All serene, old fellow," Redgill felt great relief, as he said to the company with a forced smile, "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce to your notice an eccentric friend of mine, who rejoices in the extraordinary title of Lord Smash. These gentlemen, also his companions, are friends of mine, everyone. At least they have proved themselves such, for I owe my life to their bravery and valor." "Indeed?" said all in surprise. "Men who would risk their own lives for the sake of another must be friends indeed." "I quite agree with you there, ladies and gentlemen. I invited them to call upon me at their pleasure, and although they have come at an unlooked-for moment, I am none the less pleased." "Certainly not," chorused many. "Certainly not. But how did the affair happen?" "This, then, accounts for your painful wound, Redgill?" several gallants said. "Just so," said Philip, glad at the happy turn the whole affair had now taken, and particularly pleased that the true character of the intruders had not leaked out. Upon the instant, and with ready invention, Philip Redgill concocted an imaginary story, in which he did not fail to laud his own valor, and that of the new arrivals, all of which was agreed to in sidewinks by Captain Jack and Faulkner, who, from time to time, drank heartily, and swore roundly that all the company heard was strictly true. "But now I come to look at your eccentric friend more closely," said a gallant, tapping his snuff-box, and speaking in a whisper. "The more he reminds me of one of the Crown officers, called Captain Jack." This he said with a knowing wink to Philip, who frowned. Captain Jack heard the observation, and approached the speaker, and whispered in his ear. "And now I come to look at you, my friend, the more I find you exactly correspond to a young gentleman as Captain Jack has been on the lookout for on the charge of forgery." The gallant blushed deeply, took a pinch of snuff, and bowed himself away. "Not so fast, my friend," said Captain Jack to him, as he whispered again. "You are in very snug quarters at present, and I don't wish to disturb you, but if you know how to keep a still tongue in your head, while here in the company, so do I. You understand, is it a bargain? "I fear, my eccentric friend, that you have made a slight mistake," said the elegantly attired young gentleman, with a curling lip. "I know you not. I have made no mistake," was the whispered answer. "I can, you know, when I like, swear black's white. But let me ask, do you know a certain person in the India House, a gay young spark about town, named Charles Warbeck?" said Captain Jack, winking. The stranger tried to smile, but could not. It was Ned Warbeck's elder brother. He turned deadly pale, cast a quick glance at Philip Redgill, and joined the card players again. But though he attempted to be merry and careless, care sat upon his brow, and he sighed to himself. "I am innocent, but still suspicion is strong against me. Whoever it was that forged Sir Richard's signature to that bill was no friend of mine." And he could not help thinking, as he sat in that gay and merry throng, "It was an unlucky day I ever made the acquaintance of you, Philip Redgill. Still, the end is not yet." Captain Jack's companions made themselves very much at home, in a rough, off-handed manner. They were adepts at dice and cards, and, although they began to gamble on no capital whatever, they none of them were long ere they had won large sums from those present. This happened not so much through fair as foul play, and downright roguery. However, as long as their cheating tricks were not discovered, or even suspected, they continued the play, and together with fine wines, spirits, cigars, and the like, they seemed to be enjoying themselves very much, nor did they for a moment know the true reason why Captain Jack had called there that night. This, however, was soon explained. The first opportunity that offered, Captain Jack sought Philip Redgill's side, and began a whispered conversation. "You did not call at the Cat and Bagpipes as you promised." "No," said Redgill. "I was too unwell." "Perhaps the company didn't suit you." "True, I must confess it wouldn't look well for a person of my standing to be seen in the company of thieves, vagabonds, and the like." "Of course not, I forgot all about that. Besides, my wound is painful at present." "Of course it is. It was on account of that I came here myself, in order to save you a long journey." "Why did you bring all those fellows with you?" "In case I might need them," said Captain Jack, grinning. "Need them? I do not understand you," said Redgill, turning red. "But you may do so after a time." "Indeed? And what may be your business here, I should like to know?" "I do not allow persons of your standing to intrude upon me," said Philip, with a curling lip. "Indeed? Lord, how amazingly proud you're getting," Captain Jack answered, with a sneer, and tossing off a glass of wine. "I thought we should meet as friends." "Sir, I do not understand you," said Philip, trying to shake off his rough companion, much like a sparrow frets and struggles when in the talons of a hawk. "In truth, your room is much better than your company." "I dare say, that's what a good many say. But then, you see, the Crown can't get along without such as me and my friends." "The Crown, sir? And what have I to do with you or the Crown, I should like to know?" "You wish to insinuate something, but as a man about town, I know too much of you fellows." "Ha! Ha! How clever you are! Lor, who'd have thought it?" "Thought it? Thought what?" "Why, that young Bolton is in prison," said Captain Jack, with a smile. "Serve him right, then, if he is guilty of that foul deed of which you accuse him." "Yes, now you come to think on it, it was a foul and bloody affair, wasn't it? Most horrible. And just to think as how the old man didn't offend even a mouse, and to be cruelly butchered for the sake of a few £100, and his son clapped in jail as an accomplice in the deed. He must have been an artful chap as planned that affair." "Yes, truly, he must, and an heartless villain also," said Philip. "But why do you stare at me so?" "Nothing. I was only going to ask you a question," said Captain Jack, stroking his chin in deep thought. "What is it?" "Your father is very rich?" "Yes, what of that?" "And has many ships?" "Yes." "And sometimes he insures cargoes?" "And lives also for those who wish." "Exactly," said Jack. "And if you were going abroad, how much would you insure your life for?" "That depends." "Are you going abroad?" "Perhaps so. I should insure myself even for the benefit of my friends, if nothing else, in that case, and I should take good care it was for a good round sum also." "That shows your wisdom, Mr. Redgill. But how much do you consider yourself worth?" "Well, you and I are different persons entirely," said Philip, with a careless sneer. "But I should insure myself for at least £5,000. A very nice sum indeed. Well, the other question I was going to ask is this: will you make me a present of that sum?" "Me make you a present of £5,000? Why, the man is mad." "Not quite, just the contrary," said Jack, smiling. "What do you mean?" "Mean?" said Jack. "Listen, in a whisper, mind, would you rather swing on a gibbet, or give the sum I name?" Philip turned deadly pale, as he stuttered. "What can you mean?" "Oh, only this. We have been looking after that murder case of old Bertram, and if you give us that sum, why, we won't find out the right party, that's all." "You understand?" said Captain Jack, with a knowing wink. "Has it come to this?" said Philip, after a pause, and, as he thought, unheard. "Nothing shorter, my lad. It were a clever job, you know, and by mere accident we found out all about it." "You want that sum from me, say you?" "Yes, and nothing less." "Do your band know of this?" "Not a word." "On your oath?" "Yes." "And will Bolton suffer?" "Why not?" "Suspicion is against him. He had better swing than you. Besides, we must have somebody to hang over the job, or the judges will think us worthless and useless. For the honor of our craft we must hang or transport somebody, you know, innocent or guilty, it matters little." Philip felt as if a serpent were gnawing at his heart, as he listened to Captain Jack's words. For some moments neither Philip nor Captain Jack spoke. "There cannot be a doubt now but that this knave has discovered all about old Bertram's murder, and yet for a price he will screen the guilty, and have the innocent to suffer. What a scoundrel this fellow is! Yes, 'tis true, from little things, thieves and rogues take to greater ones, until, at last, the gallows is their fate. I little thought it would come to this." For some time he shaded his face with his snow-white hand, in deep thought. But at last he aroused himself, and even attempted to be gay, as he said, "You wish to borrow that sum for a short time, eh?" "Yes," said the captain, smiling. "I wish to borrow it, if you like to call it so, and will return it," he added very ominously, "whenever you like to demand it. You understand? But I have not such a sum at command." "You do not want it all at once, I suppose?" "No, a few hundreds to commence with, and the other by installments will suit me. I'm not very particular with friends." "But how am I to get this large amount together?" said Philip. "If my father is rich, I am not." "Oh, you can get it easily enough," I dare say you have written your father's signature before now. What? Said Philip, reddening. Nothing. I was only thinking, said the captain carelessly. Would that I could give the rascal a bullet through the heart on the quiet, said Philip, as he bit his lip until it became white again. But I'll be even with him yet. The arrangement was agreed to between them, but Captain Jack could see revenge sparkling in the young man's eyes, as he handed over a large sum of money to the knave. In a short time Captain Jack and his friends retired, and shortly afterwards it was discovered that they had been not only remarkably successful in dice and cards, but that several snuff boxes and watches were missing. Who shall I victimize to get this large sum? Thought Philip. This fellow will not be joked with. And as he pondered long and silently he whispered to himself, It is a matter of life or death with me, it must be attended to, and at once, but who shall be my dupe? From whom can I get the money, by fair means or foul? It is no use trying to get a farthing from my father beyond the yearly allowance I am entitled to, and I have forged his name once too often to think of doing so again, for the last time I did so he threatened to disinherit me. Besides, if such a transaction were to reach the ears of old Sir Richard Warbeck, I doubt not he would scratch my name out of his will, and not leave me a farthing. But stay, he mused. That good-natured simpleton, Charlie Warbeck, will answer my purpose. He often goes out and collects large sums. Suppose I were to steal the amount I want from him? Aye, that's it, it shall be done. I will kill 2 birds with 1 stone. I hate these 2 Warbecks, both Charlie and Ned. I detest the very name of Ned, said he, writhing with his wound. I know how it shall be done. I will get Charlie disgraced, and then old Sir Richard will disown him. Aye, that's it. Thus the villain thought, and yet, as he bade Charlie good night, Redhill smiled, and shook him by the hand as cordially as if he were the truest and best friend in the world. How innocent he is, thought Philip, when left alone. And how handsome, too! Well, never mind, I care not who suffers so I do not. I might as well be hung for a sheep as a lamb. And as he thought of his intended plans against Charlie, he grinned like a hyena. Tomorrow shall decide it, he said, and smiled at the thought of the pit he would dig into which young Warbeck should fall.